An ordinary city librarian, Charles, was unable to save his books and died. But the universe decreed otherwise, and the rebirth took place. The young man looked at his hands and could not believe that he was alive. An unknown world with new heroes and energies. Myths about the horned dragon and his blood greeted the young man cautiously. The unknown fields of the world, fighting signs and skills occupied the attention of the main character. Transformation was the most valuable gift from the planet to the deceased teacher, who gave his life to save the book collection of the educational library. Charles was given a second chance, which he was not ready for, and simply started drinking. He did not remember parts of his current life, and this worried him a lot. In the new world, the young man moved to the rank of an unsuccessful teacher, the last in the ranking of university graduates. The young man was studying the situation, walking around the town, trying to remember or understand individual episodes, when he unexpectedly ran into his former classmates, the best graduates Michael and his former girlfriend Mary. The main character was drawn to the library building, but the keeper Ron, for some unknown reason, did not want to let him inside. Charles had the impression that in his new life he had more enemies and haters than in his previous one, and he could not confirm his status as a mentor since all the students were taken by his classmates. The young man decided to completely change his second life so that everyone would recognize and respect him. The decision abruptly changed the young teacher's shell. Suddenly he found himself in a huge space, surrounded on all sides by cabinets and shelves, completely filled with thick volumes. One of the books flew past and fell into the hands of the surprised young man, suddenly lighting up his mind with fresh ideas and sending him on a search for disciples. Charles encountered the young, pink-haired beauty Sandra, puzzling the girl with information about her leg injury, which prevents her from winning. Then the spearman Alan, suffering from his heroine's unrequited feelings. Blonde Alex became an unexpected gift from his competitor and enemy Jacques. The clash of two personalities led to the proud and wayward Princess Monica becoming his student. 4 young men, each choosing a teacher for their lives, never expected that it would be Charles, unknown and disrespected by everyone, who would be given their signatures. The new mentor pointed out to each of the future successors the main flaw that kills success and the will to win, which helped Alan calm down and look at his feelings from the outside. The students promised to listen to the teacher unconditionally. Charles knew that by recruiting students he would turn many people against him, including Michael, a rival from his student days. The enemies also included the uncle of the beautiful Monica, who was ready to do anything for the happiness of his ward. Sandra's brother was also outraged when he learned that his sister had gone to study with a loser tutor. Charles had to prove he was right by force. Each of the new pupils' relatives received their share of blows. The young man's former classmates also got it. The morning came. The old but spacious teacher's house with a classroom was waiting for the first students. Long-haired Monica had no intention of changing the teacher she had chosen long ago, but the incomprehensible abilities of the unsuccessful teacher intrigued her. The girl agreed to be a student in order to find out the secret. The princess tried to find out the teacher's name, but he insisted on registering for the class. The teacher began to think of sonorous initials, but nothing came to mind, and he enthusiastically pronounced his own. The beauty freed herself from the mentor's grasp and went to gather information. Monica didn't learn anything new and was upset, and the young teacher tormented himself with thoughts about where else he could find students. The classroom was completely unkempt and empty. The feeling of dissatisfaction oppressed the teacher. Students were still needed to renew the registration license, the situation was becoming more complicated, and Charles decided to treat his problems with alcohol. So, if you look at everything one by one, then Sandra's appearance brought the main character back to reality. The girl wanted to change her mind and leave. The teacher gave a whole lecture on the topic of choosing a teacher. The mentor tried to convince the lady that he was a smart and experienced teacher, and that talk about his incompetence was just gossip from envious people. The young man was firm and unwavering. He said that only together could he and his student achieve victory. The pink-haired beauty was scared. To defuse the situation, Charles offered the girl to demonstrate her skills, and she happily agreed. The polished techniques, beautiful execution, and quick reaction were superb. The teacher looked at his charge, fascinated. Sandra performed the technical moves and froze. The girl eagerly awaited her senior comrade's assessment. The teacher appreciated the training and noted the beauty's talent. The student was disappointed because her mentor did not notice the leg injury that prevented her from moving fully. Charles was upset. He did not understand how he had missed such an important fact and tried to smooth over the situation. Sandra became interested in who and what could help her. The young teacher instilled hope in the girl, and this is one of the main conditions for victory. The beauty's eyes sparkled and she smiled. The main character convinced the future student that there were very few teachers who could help her, and he was one of them. Charles said he was currently recruiting a small group of students and classes would begin soon. The plan worked, and the girl asked to register her for the course. The guy immediately took out the license plate. The contract was signed. Charles now had his first official student on his list. The young teacher reminded that classes would begin in the coming days. The happy girl ran to share the information with her relatives. The teacher was also happy about his small victory. The mentor was inspired by the fact that the license would now be retained and the provided housing and work premises would remain his. Charles made plans to fully engage in the learning process so that he would not be ashamed of his teacher. A whirlpool of air caught the young man, tearing him away from his serious thoughts. The next second, the teacher was sitting at the huge gates of the library. It was the very library of the heavenly path that the guy had been constantly dreaming about lately. Fascinated and drawn him to it. An innumerable number of book volumes surrounded the former librarian. Charles decided to take the brochure. The young man walked over to the nearest shelf with 100 bright, thick volumes and reached for the tome. A hand suddenly passed through a row of books. The luxurious floating library was missing the most important thing, books. Returning to reality, the young man walked home and wondered if there could be any use for a heavenly repository of non-existent tomes. The new information tired Charles and he went to have a snack. It was not possible to reach the canteen calmly. Another former classmate, now a teacher with a high rating, Jacques, was on his way to meet. The colleague and a group of his newly recruited students greeted the loser with laughter and mockery. A classmate told the younger generation about his friend's 0 rating and had a great time. The students were surprised by the teacher's low grade on the final exam. Charles gave a verbal rebuff and advised his colleague not to brag. Jacques was furious. He did not expect such pressure in front of his charges. The squabble between the young teachers took place in a circle of new students who listened attentively to the words of the older generation. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out in defense of the unsuccessful teacher. Sandra walked into the crowd, followed by her elderly relative, who was barely keeping up with her. The man tried to persuade the girl to change her mentor and refused to study in the loser's class. Jacques took advantage of the situation, laughing that the girl was going to leave her master before she even started studying. Charles intervened in a dispute between a young student and a relative, asking whether her desire to leave the class was correct. Sandra didn't want to offend the new teacher and didn't know what to answer. The young man decided to blackmail, explaining to his relative that if he refused to study, none of the teachers would want to take the girl. The main character was afraid of missing his only chance and tried to persuade the couple to change their minds. The malicious Jacques intervened in the conversation, declaring that he would be happy to take the girl to study with him. The young men had a quarrel and decided to hold an open competition among themselves to attract students. Jacques was confident in his abilities. Charles had no choice but to agree, so as not to lose his only ward. Students and teachers gathered in the schoolyard to watch the rare spectacle. According to the university rules, teachers had to exchange students and, after the test, show them the shortest path to progress. A little nervously, Sandra was the first to show her skills. The girl's blow was powerful enough to show the strength examiner on the screen, but the execution was lacking. Jacques assessed the student's strength and endurance and suggested the presence of an old leg injury, which was preventing her from improving her results. Charles was shocked. He did not understand how his opponent had easily completed the task. Having secluded himself with the pink-haired beauty, the new teacher gave her some tactical advice. The students watched in amazement as the girl's strike results doubled. A blonde guy named Alex, Jacques' a student, approached the former librarian. The young mentor stopped the competition. He was trying to stall for time. The opponent and his protégé stood in bewilderment. Charles decided to clarify his benefit from this dispute, since the option of reward in case of his victory had not been discussed in advance. The enemy stood in bewilderment and confusion. He did not even consider the thought of losing. Confident Jacques easily agreed to hand over his student, who tried to resist. The answer satisfied Charles, and the competition continued. The blonde was inimitable. His movements and blows were precise and fast. The blow to the testing stone was swift. The unsuccessful teacher was confused. He did not know what to say and how to evaluate the student, realizing that his 0 rating was absolutely justified. Gradually, everything calmed down in Charles's mind, and the heavenly library floated before his eyes. One of the flying books landed right into the teacher's hands. The student's name was engraved on the cover. The main character instantly mastered the flow of information. Now he knew everything about his ward. The book fully described all the strengths and weaknesses of its hero. Charles replayed Alex's punch in his head again. The teacher understood the meaning and purpose of the Heavenly Library, which assessed a person and wrote down a detailed description with recommendations for eliminating existing flaws and problems. Only now did the former librarian appreciate what a gift life had given him. Charles was prevented from telling about his shortcomings by the laughter of his competitor, who could not believe in a loser. The other students supported their teacher with loud laughter. The young man refused to participate in the competition if they would not listen to him. The young man said that in that case, the result of the dispute would be cancelled. Shouts of support from the crowd diffused the situation. Charles suggested that the young man work with his left hand. Alex was the most surprised by the advice. Jacques smiled, celebrating the upcoming victory. The pupil gathered his strength and performed the strike. The control screen went dark, then showed a stunning result, exceeding the previous one by tens of times. The blonde's teacher looked at the numbers in complete amazement. All the spectators stood with the same look. They were very surprised. The student did not expect such power from his left hand. He had never used his left hand in combat. The competition ended with the librarian winning. Charles pulled out a second registration badge. For registration, blood from the future pupil was needed. Alex couldn't believe that he was simply given to someone else, because he had spent a long time choosing his mentor and preparing for his studies. The crowd began to disperse to their own affairs. Jacques grumbled and threatened to take revenge on his colleague. The agreement on the student's transfer to another class was ready for execution. The blonde had no choice but to confirm what had happened. Registration completed successfully. The entire university courtyard discussed the results of the competition. From class to class, from group to group, the rumors about the phenomenal abilities of the unsuccessful teacher spread. The beautiful Monica, who was sitting on the bench, was interested in the result of the fight. Deciding that it was just luck, the young student decided to conduct an investigation herself. Everyone around was talking about Alex's new strength figures. The princess decided to personally visit the teacher and find out how he managed to achieve such results and give her advice on how to improve her performance as well. Charles enjoyed the opening of the school and did not expect any guests. Monica behaved irritably and impudently from the doorway, which the librarian did not like at all. The teacher refused to listen to the girl and give recommendations. The mentor immediately didn't like the beauty's rudeness. The refusal enraged the girl even more. In exchange for information, Charles offered a place in his class, causing Monica to think. Two friends, who overheard the entire conversation from the street, were extremely surprised. The girls raced to tell Monica's relatives that she was planning to change teachers. The librarian pretended that he wasn't going to persuade the beauty if she didn't want to enroll in his class. The princess was completely enraged by the behavior of the new teacher, but she did not show it. The clash of the two elements continued. Charles continued to test the girl's patience. He offered to completely clean the school premises in exchange for registration. Monica had no choice but to agree. The mentor quietly celebrated his victory over the seething character of his new pupil. The girl took on the difficult task, as there was a lot of dust and dirt everywhere. A fire was boiling in the beauty's soul, and she promised to take revenge on the teacher. After a few hours, everything in the house was sparkling. Everything was clean and tidy. Charles was pleased and offered to sign the registration. The girl already dreamed of quickly becoming strong and destroying the self-confident teacher. The mentor invited Monica to show her skills. The girl happily responded to the request. The young man carefully studied the tactics of his new ward. The flow of the heavenly path has captured its master again. Charles stood in the middle of the library room and waited. The book with Monica's name was ready. The brochure described positive and negative traits, fighting style and mistakes. The mentor studied the volume from beginning to end. Finally, the teacher came across the necessary information, revealing the girl's characteristics. While awaiting sentencing, the princess practiced her punches on the screen. The teacher praised the girl, saying that her strength was worthy of a lord's daughter. Monica asked to point out her shortcomings, hiding behind her back a crystal that records information. The girl hoped to use the magical recording against the teacher. The teacher's answer was stunning. The beauty couldn't believe it. According to the librarian, the lord's daughter was ill, which she categorically denied. The conversation dragged on, everyone insisting on their own. Monica insisted that she was perfectly fine. Charles reminded the student of the pain points that must often bother her. The teacher kept silent about the girl's less-than-angelic character and constant irritability. What was said shocked the student. Her teacher turned out to be right. The mentor was jubilant. He managed to tame Monica's tough temper. The pupil became thoughtful and asked if there was a solution to her problem. The teacher's experience grew in the girl's eyes instantly. She began to believe everything that was said and promised to come to classes. During the lessons, the mentor promised to teach her how to cope with her shortcomings. The information received was not for wide distribution. and the librarian reminded about the recording of the conversation. Monica was surprised by the teacher's knowledge. She did not want to reveal her secret and broke the crystal. The girl began to trust her mentor more and more. The teacher went to training, reminding the student once again about attending classes. Suddenly, an angry man appeared in the distance. It turned out to be Monica's uncle, who was extremely unhappy with the change of teacher and was eager to sort things out. The beauty was surprised by the sudden appearance of her relative and his mood. The uncle tried to convince the young man to exclude the girl from the lists, threatening to get the teacher fired. Monica's words discouraged him. She admitted that she had chosen the new teacher herself. The Lord's daughter insisted on her choice. The family quarrel was escalating. No one wanted to give in. The girl's relative was furious. The man did not calm down. He ordered his ward to be released and threatened to kill the teacher. Monica tried her best to calm her angry uncle. The girl took her relative by the hand and led him home. She had already begun to fear for her mentor, knowing the character of her relatives. The young man didn't understand anything. He was simply recruiting students. Where did such hatred from those around him come from? At this time, two of the teenager's friends were walking past the fence of Charles's school, talking loudly. The guy with the spear was clearly upset. He was denied enrollment in a class and had to wait for the next intake. The interlocutor tried to calm him down. The boys perked up when they saw the school sign. The friends looked into the yard and went into the classroom. The furnishings seemed very old to them. There was a teacher sitting at a large table at the end of the room. A friend asked to admit a boy to school on behalf of his shy, gun-toting comrade. Charles was very happy, and the young man had no choice. The other mentors had already completed the recruitment of students. The guy with the spear was named Alan, and he really looked upset. The teacher asked the young man to show his skills, and the boy hit the examiner's screen with all his might. After demonstrating the techniques, Alan waited for his mentor's recommendations. The boy was surprised that the teacher was thoughtful. It seemed as if he was not watching his actions at all. The spearman became even more upset. He thought that no one needed him, and the year was wasted. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the teacher's voice, revealing the secret of the young man's condition. Alan was surprised. He hid his personal problem from everyone. Even his best friend didn't know about it. The librarian said that he needed to think more about the future and not live in the present day, which the boy was stuck in. The mentor pointed out that the blow would be much stronger if the young man was more focused and attentive. The fact that Alan was in love was revealed, and the unrequited feeling was the cause of his depression. Charles said that emotional state plays a key role in life and influences success. The instructions were short but very useful for both friends. The teacher explained that almost everything in life depends on the young man himself, and only he can change the situation. The teacher reminded the boy of the phrase of the mentor of all times from the Book of Wisdom, instilling confidence in him. The young man's consciousness cleared and he began to think. Now Charles only had to look at the results of the recommendations, and he directed Alan to the screen to consolidate the success. The boy was mentally prepared for a new challenge. The force of the blow was impressive, and both boys were completely confused. The boys did not expect such a result. The friend couldn't believe his eyes. Alan improved his performance more than twice. The young man thanked the mentor for the recommendation and asked to enroll in his class. My partner was secretly worried that he himself had not gotten into this school. The teacher's name confused the boys. They had already heard about his rating at the university. The laughing mentor confirmed their terrible guess. The boys didn't know what to do. They didn't understand how a person with such low grades could be so wise. Charles told them the reason for his achievements, explaining that the Heavenly Library was guiding him on the right path. In gratitude for this advice, Alan signed up for the classes and promised to come to school in the morning. The friends went home to share their news. The main character was jubilant. He already had 4 students. The registration tokens ran out, and the young man went to the administrative building for additional signs. The teacher wondered why he only got 4 cards. Apparently, those around him did not expect great results from him. The librarian was approached by his first teacher, who currently held the position of head of the logistics department and responsible registrar of the institution. The man was accompanied by Charles's former classmates. The sight of the approaching company did not please the young man. They had humiliated him back in school, and judging by their mood, they were ready to continue their old entertainment. The protagonist tried to calmly explain the reason for his appearance in the administrative building, asking for new tokens. The information about the recruitment of 4 students made those around him laugh a lot. No one believed Charles's words. The young man suggested checking the database and making sure he was right. The former student and the head of the department argued over who would be right. Charles suggested that the loser receive 3 slaps as punishment. The administrator was very pleased with the option and happily agreed, anticipating the upcoming entertainment. The former classmates were happy to add a few more blows. The register of registered students lay on the counter, and the young people began to study the document. With each page turned, the boys' surprise grew. In the young mentor's registration book, there really were 4 students. The first teacher personally rechecked the notes and turned purple with indignation. As he read the students' details, the chief registrar's complexion grew darker and darker, the names impressing with their high status. The head of the department did not believe that the children themselves came to the loser's school. He accused his former student of deception. Charles was unperturbed. He knew that everything was fair. The agreement that the loser would receive a slap was forgotten, and the 4 enemies threatened to beat up the young man. The long-legged, handsome man who considered himself a genius and was very proud of himself was especially indignant. The administrator sent the guys to deal with the loser in his place. It didn't take more than a few seconds before one was already lying on the floor in a pool of blood. None of the vile attackers understood how this happened. The protagonist was ready to repel the next blow. The remaining 3, forgetting about honor, rushed into battle. It took the librarian a moment to mentally focus on each of the offenders. Magic manuscripts revealed the secret weaknesses of enemies. The knowledge gained was useful, and the opponents fell one after another. With one blow, right on target, Charles took out the attackers. The former mentor, who did not believe in his protege, was especially hard hit. The offenders, who had received what they deserved, had difficulty getting up from the floor. Charles explained that to defeat an enemy, strength is not enough. Knowledge is needed. The young man said that everyone has special life points on their body, touching which can even kill a person. The enemies did not understand what had happened to them and how a weak classmate was able to defeat them, deciding that it was just luck, so they again began to threaten violence. The head of the department threatened to fire him because the young teacher attacked and beat up an official in the university building. Charles had to use the additional secret knowledge he had gained in the Heavenly Library and reminded the administrator that he had stolen jewelry from a high-ranking person and given it to another. A librarian accused a former classmate of poisoning his brother in order to take over his business. Now everyone present in the room was truly shocked. The enemies crawled to the young man on their knees, asking for mercy and silence. The main character warned that he did not want to sort out the past, but if they interfered with him, he would definitely pass the information on to higher authorities. The head of the department personally gave the young mentor a whole box of registration tokens. Satisfied, Charles went to his school. The young man mentally thanked the Library of the Heavenly Path, which once again saved his honor and life. Passing by the pond, the mentor saw that on the shore a fat man was slowly moving towards the water, intending to die. 2 friends tried to dissuade him and pulled him away from the edge. The forces were unequal. The overweight teenager dragged his friends into the water. They could not cope with him. One of the friends grabbed hold of the other, and the chain moved confidently straight into the lake. The teacher did not want to interfere, but it was necessary to urgently rescue the rescuers. Now the fat man grabbed the mentor's leg and tried to continue his way to the water. He was upset and did not want to live. The delighted assistants raced to get away from their friend. Charles inquired about the reason for the boy's inappropriate behavior and learned that he had attended 10 schools and all the teachers had refused to register the boy. A conversation with an unknown mentor distracted the poor fellow from his stupid thoughts. The teacher suggested showing his skills and abilities. John, as the fat man was called, happily agreed. The guy's special feature was his stamina and endurance. He did not feel pain and had great strength, so he could boldly break bricks on his head and body. Charles froze again, the familiar carousel of movements already beginning to spin in his head. "Hello, library," thought the teacher, and began to wait for the treasured volume. The information from the book surprised the master. The young teacher learned that on the planet everyone is born in a certain state. There are several classes of fighters and blood characteristics. The strength, skills, and abilities of the hero depend on this. Every fighter is born with certain skills. The magic crystal fighter is cold and calm as ice. The firefighter possesses the power of his element, is strong and fearless. The chi fighter is universal and has enormous energy, making them virtually invincible. In addition to the fighter's status, the fluid that flows through a person's vessels plays a big role. The blood can be ancient or new. This is one level. Of particular importance are hereditary and variable blood. This is the next step. The most powerful, invincible, and weapon-resistant blood type is a special type of ancient blood called the blood of the horned dragon, one of the best in terms of protection. And it was this blood that flowed through John's body. The teacher's eyes were shining with joy. Such a student is definitely needed on the team. The teacher suggested that the boy enroll in classes at the school. John couldn't believe his luck. It was necessary to draw up an agreement for registering a new student. The young man did not believe that he would study too. Charles's conversation with the student was interrupted by a phrase from a former classmate, now a successful teacher, Michael, walking along the alley along the shore with a young teacher, Mary, a former girlfriend of the librarian, and calling the couple standing there a dump with garbage. The girl looked closely at her old acquaintance. Charles and John were offended by this comparison. In the presence of a beautiful girl, the teacher behaved very demonstratively and rudely, trying to make a good impression on his companion. Charles did not remain in debt and parried his colleague's attack, saying that the unpleasant smell appeared only when new arrivals arrived. Michael was angry. He did not expect such a rebuff from the loser, and his companion appreciated the successful joke of her friend. The fight did not take place. The opponents resorted to verbal altercation. John heard a lot of unpleasant things about himself, although he had done nothing bad to Michael, and learned that he had ended up in the class of the most unlucky teacher. Charles was protective of his new student and his status. The arrogant teacher suggested that the girl quickly leave the interlocutors so as not to ruin her reputation, which the lady did not like at all. Mary approached her former friend, smiled, and tried to support him, saying that she believed in his success. He just needed to not give up and work constantly. The young man thanked him for the advice and said that his new student was simply underestimated. In fact, he was a real fighter. Michael tried to object, but the young teacher wanted to continue the walk without her annoying companion, which greatly upset him. Left without a witness, both mentors began to sort things out. John took advantage of the situation and tried to escape from the loser teacher before he could register. The escape failed. Charles reminded the teenager where the school was and that classes would start the next day. The mentor has completed the process of registering a new student. The student hoped that if he missed classes, he would be expelled, to which the new teacher politely promised to drown him in the very pond with frogs, where the young man had so recently been heading. Only in the evening did the main character get home. Charles promised himself that he would become the best mentor for his students, but he doubted his own strength and experience. Classes will start the next day, and the teacher decided to systematize and repeat his knowledge. One of the teachings was the principle of 9 paths, which everyone studied and applied in training from childhood to old age. The protagonist's rank was low and remained at level 3 after his final exams, unlike the other teachers, which made him think about getting promoted. Charles decided to take advantage of the free evening and went to the main university temple of knowledge. The young mentor decided to combine the knowledge of 2 libraries, including the heavenly one. Ron, the library's keeper, sat on the threshold. The elder was very displeased with the visit of the late guest. The young teacher asked to be allowed to study books on martial arts. The university library was very large and contained hundreds of thousands of volumes. Charles found the right section and began leafing through the brochures one by one. The heavenly repository appeared in his head again. The new tome revealed a huge number of shortcomings of the most important combat skill. The young man was puzzled. The teacher looked through ancient manuscripts and modern theories. Charles tried to find a system that would help him correct the shortcomings of the teachings and help him choose the best ones. The bookshelves stood in dense, endless rows. The librarian could read an entire volume with one glance, identifying the most important points. The mountains of studied material grew with every minute. Time flew by unnoticed. The tired but pleased with himself young man left the building. The keeper was dissatisfied and surprised. He did not understand what the young man was doing in the library for so long if he only moved books and did not make any notes. It was deep night when the teacher reached his workplace. The teacher tried to understand how the heavenly path could be used to change the system and fix the problems. The mentor was again transported to the ghostly book depository. The volumes studied by the young man flew in a circle, creating a single carousel. A large brochure fell into the boy's hands. Charles was amazed. All the information received that evening was systematized in a certain order, indicating shortcomings and describing recommendations for improvement. The book was a completely new teaching, previously unknown to anyone. The young man decided to call the new style the Heavenly Path, and this name immediately appeared on the cover. The next step was to understand the meaning and provisions of the concept. It seemed as if knowledge itself penetrated deep into the body. The mentor focused completely on the theory and felt himself beginning to transform. Charles felt that his level of knowledge and protection, that is, his rank, had jumped from an average 3rd to a high 5th. The young man tried to understand how perestroika happened. The young teacher realized that all the books he had studied in the evening, which were part of the generally accepted system, were concentrated into one, combining the best and correcting the shortcomings. The rules of life were such that in the existing teaching there were 3 levels of chi energy, each including 5 levels and 4 sublevels. Charles realized that he had reached the highest level. It was necessary to check his guesses, and the teacher went to the power screen. The examination stone was ready to take the test. Gathering his energy, the young man made a throw. The force of the blow was extremely powerful. Not believing the result, the librarian doubted the equipment was working properly. Charles was a little scared by his new possibilities. The young man stood near the screen and noticed a shadow flashing in the darkness. The teacher went around the corner of his house and hid. The masked stranger held a dagger in his hands and crept up to the entrance of the building. Hearing sounds behind him, the man looked back. Charles realized that he had been noticed and that the fighter had come to sort things out with the owner of the house, that is, with him, and decided to play along, also calling himself the enemy of the owner. The stranger was full of anger and promised to deal with the stubborn teacher. The stranger suggested that the guy join forces and attack together, casually mentioning his name. The volume from the Heavenly Library was immediately nearby. The young man learned the enemy's rank and defense level, his weaknesses, and was determined to defeat the uninvited night guest. The men approached the gate. Charles distracted the militants' attention with a loud shout. Taking advantage of the confusion, the young teacher attacked his enemy. The stranger, not expecting the blow, fell and received a series of blows from which he was unable to defend himself. The librarian won easily because he knew the enemy's weaknesses. A few more fighting moves and the stranger finally gave up, his strength leaving him. Charles devised a plan to divert suspicion from himself. The young man casually mentioned the name of his ex-girlfriend, hinting to his opponent about his involvement with his classmates and successful young teachers, saying that he would deal with his offender himself without outside help. The stranger, who turned out to be Monica's uncle and came to take revenge on the teacher, realized that he could have been beaten by the young mentor's enemy, Michael, whom he had seen during the day irritably talking surrounded by Mary and Charles. Morning came and the school hospitably opened its doors to its first students. 4 teenagers were sitting at the student tables, only Monica was missing. The teacher began the lesson by studying the style of each student. Sandra was chosen first, as it was with her that the recruitment of teenagers into the class began. The girl was upset that she ended up with a loser and planned to change her teacher. The teacher retired with his student to the training room. The pink-haired beauty showed her main attack. The mentor's conclusion was short and impressive. The teacher explained that during an old battle, the enemy was able to hit the girl's power point, damaging the path of energy and blood to one leg, which is related to her condition. Sandra confessed that no doctor could solve her problem. Everyone was inclined to believe that the limb would remain damaged forever. The young teacher promised to correct the situation and help restore the lost strength. The girl, who was about to leave her teacher, realized that she had hope for healing and faith in her mentor. The teacher began the healing process immediately using acupuncture. Sharp needles filled with the teacher's energy flew straight at Sandra. The student's entire body was covered with prickly objects. Charles continued to send streams of power to his ward. The girl absorbed the purest energy and wondered where a teacher with a 0 rating could get it from, unless it was just a fabrication of those around her. The beauty felt that the strength in her leg had been restored, and she became completely different. The student did not believe what was happening and thanked her mentor. Sandra was happy to continue her studies with her savior. While the teacher was busy, a conflict was brewing in the class. Left alone, the students decided to protest and collectively leave the hapless teacher. The sight of a smiling, happy classmate emerging from the next room was impressive. The young men doubted their decision. Suddenly, Monica appeared at the threshold of the classroom with her uncle William, whose entire face was bandaged. The man was going to be present at the classes and keep an eye on his ward and the learning process. Charles disagreed and asked the intruder to leave the classroom. Rage and anger boiled in the gaze and behavior of the young lady's bodyguard. Monica managed to throw her relative out the door so she could continue her studies. Alex was the next to go into the training room with the teacher. From the very beginning, the mentor stated that the blonde could not achieve high results because he was independently studying one of the techniques, which took away his main energy and caused irreparable damage to his body. The teenager was surprised by the teacher's knowledge and insight. None of the other teachers, including the most famous ones, noticed this. The librarian described in detail all the young man's mistakes. As a result of the existing shortcomings in the process of self-education, the boy developed health problems that could not be treated. Charles addressed each problem and explained the ways to resolve it, indicating that only through this would healing occur. Inspired by new knowledge, the student was ready to continue his studies and listen to his mentor without question. The teacher promised to help me overcome my shortcomings and master new techniques. Another delighted student was on the librarian's team. The 2 remaining guys looked hopefully at Alex as he left the hall. The first phrases shocked the young men. The blonde had no intention of leaving school and steadfastly defended the teacher. Monica was third on the list of students tested. Charles revealed to the girl the secret of birth and possession of great life energy, promising to choose for her an individual style, taking into account her inner strength and to cope with the existing disease. Having thanked the teacher, the beauty went to class. John quickly took the mentor's side after listening to his recommendations. He had already managed to study the literature given by the teacher and did not know how to thank fate for meeting him. The fighting spirit of the young spearman was also broken instantly, as soon as the conversation turned to Alan's abilities and the possibility of changing his relationship with the stranger. All the students were eager to learn new knowledge and skills, and Charles continued the lesson. An unexpected kick knocked down the classroom door. The pupils looked around to see what had happened. A tall, stately young man stood on the threshold, looking aggressive. It turned out that it was Sandra's older brother, a fourth-rank fighter. The teacher asked the imposter not to interfere with the lessons and to leave the school. The warrior was ready for a deadly fight and was not going to retreat. He came to take his sister and punish the young mentor for registering a girl in his school. The intruder attacked first, bringing the full force of his sword down on the teacher. The blade easily stopped between two fingers of the protagonist's hand. The fighter tried to free the weapon, but the teacher did not give him a chance to act. He held the blade firmly and with one movement of his hand sent the bully out of the gate. Uncle William heard the noise of the battle, looking out from behind the front door and rejoicing that the mentor would finally be punished. The warrior landed on the slightly opened door, crushing Monica's relative standing behind it. Groans and angry cries did not prevent the main character from continuing his lessons. The teacher easily dealt with the attacker, demonstrating his true strength. The students were shocked. They did not expect a quick victory from a mentor with a 0 rating. The injured relatives of the wards, clutching their broken heads, discussed how a third-rank warrior could demonstrate such a high level of combat. While classes were in progress, 2 of Charles' former classmates met in the administration office and discussed how their loser colleague would teach children if he did not have the necessary knowledge and skills. After some discussion, Michael and Jacques decided to attend the librarian's lesson. Approaching the school, the young teacher saw familiar, respectable men from noble families. Relatives complained to the young mentors that their charges were deceived and illegally forced to attend school. Charles told his students about his new teaching, comparing it with the past, analyzing its advantages and the disadvantages of the previous one. The children were happy and listened attentively to every word. The students couldn't believe how lucky they were to have such a mentor. New guests interrupted the lesson again. The main character was surprised by the visit of his colleagues, highly rated teachers. A senior teacher accused a librarian of cheating in relation to student registration. The young mentors began to sort things out, recalling past grievances. The argument became serious, with everyone defending their own rights. Michael mentioned their last meeting in the alley and their classmate Mary, now also a teacher at the university. Uncle William, all in bandages, remembered that the fighter who attacked him at night had cursed Charles and mentioned the girl's name. He realized that he had found the offender and his fist instantly flew into the face of the librarian's classmate. Michael, not understanding anything, held his broken nose and demanded an explanation. Monica's relative rubbed his hands contentedly and prepared for a new attack. Now he would take revenge for everything. The young man found himself on the ground and received blow after blow, without having time to defend himself. Sandra's brother had a hard time pulling the enraged man aside. Michael, covered in wounds and bruises, could not calm down. He did not understand why he was brutally beaten and what happened to the honorable citizen. The strangers left the school grounds. The classes ended and the satisfied students went home. Now they knew for sure that their teacher was the best. Monica asked her uncle what happened and why he beat the other mentor so badly. Sandra said goodbye to the teacher and also went to rest. Outside the school gates, the brother grabbed the girl by the hand and forcibly took her home. The man told his sister that she would no longer be studying in that class. The girl was surprised and upset by her brother's words. She happily waited for the next day to come to classes again. Humiliated and beaten, Michael walked with his friend to the office and plotted revenge. The boys could not understand the reason for William's anger. The classmates blamed Charles for everything and each went their separate ways. A scandal awaited Sandra at home. The angry father scolded the girl and insisted that she leave the school of the hapless teacher. The head of the family promised to transfer the girl to another class. Numerous relatives supported their fellow and reproached the ward, who desperately and hopelessly tried to protect her mentor. The relatives did not calm down, not paying attention to the child's words. Sandra couldn't stand the pressure and forced everyone to shut up with her scream. The father told the girl that if she returned to school without his consent, he would not let her into the house again. Realizing that words were useless, the pink-haired beauty decided to show her strength in action by approaching the home power column. The double-legged kick broke all screen records. The relatives froze in amazement. They saw with their own eyes that the girl was healed and full of strength. The head of the family was the most surprised and delighted. He knew how many healers had tried to cure the child. The father began asking his daughter what they were doing in class, what they were studying, and gave Sandra advice not to leave the teacher. The day was hard for Charles. In the evening, he decided to continue studying literature and went to the university library again. He wanted to become the best teacher for his students, and for this, he needed knowledge. Guardian Ron sat in his previous place and did not allow the young man to enter. The elder immediately let Mary, who had approached the library, into the hall. The young teacher was indignant because he also came for knowledge. The ex-girlfriend unexpectedly supported her colleague, and the guard had no choice but to let both visitors in. Paying no attention to his intercessor, Charles hurried to the books. The teacher did not expect such a zeal for knowledge. She hoped to communicate with the young man. The young mentor realized that there might not be a next time, so he had to have time to study all the available literature. Seeing her colleague engrossed in the volumes, Mary was tormented by the question of why the custodian did not want to let the teacher into the library. The girl decided to keep an eye on Charles and find out what he was planning to do here. The young man enthusiastically leafed through book after book, not paying attention to those around him and not noticing anything. It was night, and visitors did not leave the book depository building. Mary, not seeing anything reprehensible, also began to read. After analyzing the information obtained from the manuscripts, Charles realized that he had found a training method for Monica. The young man was surprised that several hours had passed, and his classmate had not yet left the reading room. On the way out, Ron stopped the young teacher. He didn't like the fact that Charles was just moving books around without delving into the essence and without taking notes. He didn't know that it took the young man just a few seconds to master the material. The elder was indignant, accusing the boy of laziness. The main character said goodbye and said that he would not return, since he had mastered all the literature available there. Mary, who came out after him, stopped the teacher. The girl wanted to test her colleague, who had not paid attention to her the whole evening, and asked him to explain an ancient recipe, deliberately changing the text. The main character pointed out the mistakes made by the teacher in the place where the necessary information could be read. The former classmate was extremely surprised. The answer was correct. Ron, who heard the young people's conversation, also decided to examine the young man. In response to the keeper's question, Charles not only gave a complete answer, but also expressed his own interpretation and drew conclusions. The test was passed with flying colors, and the young teacher breathed a sigh of relief. The custodian, who did not believe the accuracy of the young teacher's answer, went with the girl to the reading room to find the necessary volumes and make sure that the young man was right. The information he found completely shocked the elder. Mary caught up with her colleague and, as compensation for his mistrust, invited him to dinner. Hungry Charles couldn't resist the girl's offer. The classmates walked along the bamboo alleys to the city. Along the way, the main character analyzed what he had read, discovered a new meaning in ancient teachings and techniques, suddenly realizing that his transformation was taking place, and he was mentally moving to the next level of reason. Mary also noticed the change in the young man. There was a beautiful restaurant in the center of the town, and the girl wanted to bring her colleague there. Charles was surprised. He had never been to such places. The couple who came in for dinner were seen by the young man's old enemies sitting at the table. Michael had repeatedly invited the beauty to his favorite establishment. She had always refused, and now she was going to the table with the loser. A plan for revenge began to spin in the heads of his classmates. The happy and satisfied librarian thanked him for the delicious treat and got ready to go home. The restaurant manager, who personally greeted and served all the guests, brought the bill, and the girl was stunned. The price of the dinner was exorbitant. The wine, which they had not ordered, cost a fortune, and the attendant demanded payment immediately. Michael intervened in the conflict, planning to shame the enemy and appease the unapproachable beauty with his noble act. Mary was surprised by the appearance of her colleague. His incorrect words and behavior only offended her. The teacher refused the offered help. As payment, the girl gave the manager a family talisman, which was several times greater than the cost of the ordered food. Michael and Jacques realized that the plan had failed. Charles, who had been standing quietly to the side and not taking part in the conversations, realized that it was time to act, and he could not allow Mary to lose the precious relic. The main character accused the restaurant workers of cheating in the preparation of exquisite dishes and their cheap counterfeiting. The assembled visitors listened with interest to the newly discovered facts. The expensive wine also turned out to be of low quality and poor quality. To prove his words, the young teacher conducted an experiment with fire, substantiating the validity of the accusations. Angry restaurant guests and passers-by attacked the manager, demanding compensation for moral and material damages. Charles's enemies also got into trouble, having started the conflict and suggested that the service staff, supposedly by accident, bring an extra drink to the table. Mary was once again surprised by the young man's knowledge and questioned the negative results of his final tests. The young man mentally thanked the heavenly path for its help, the dispute was won, and they got dinner for free. Having said goodbye to his colleague, the main character headed home. The girl caught up with the guy to thank him for saving the family treasure. She couldn't understand why he wasn't paying any attention to her. The couple's conversation was interrupted again by an offended Michael. The colleague wanted to take revenge on the offender for ruining the dinner and the relationship with the beauty. Having decided to deal with the loser once and for all, the angry young man called for help from his grandfather's protege and his protector, the Heavenly Lion, ordering him to kill Charles. Mary, in horror, tried to defend her hero. She reminded him that killing a teacher was a grave sin, but the guy was insane. A huge, ferocious beast ran in the footsteps of the owner's grandson's offender. The girl and her two colleagues remained to watch the events. Michael, with great difficulty, held the teacher back. A few seconds later, instead of a bloody massacre, everyone saw a lion, calmly closing its eyes and lying peacefully at Charles's feet. The owner of the formidable predator could not believe what was happening. The beauty, realizing that she had become the cause of the showdown, no longer expected to see her former friend alive and could not understand how he dealt with the shaggy monster. At this time, the restaurant manager reported to Jack, the owner of the restaurant, about what had happened, trying to blame the people's mistrust and the bankruptcy of the establishment on the young, unknown teacher. The blow was deflected from him, and the owner of the establishment promised to find and destroy the offender. Tired from the night's events, the protagonist walked home and thought about how he could further strengthen his defense and increase his energy and intelligence levels to improve his mentoring work. Studying books to achieve the goal was not enough. Special amulets and artifacts were required for this. The librarian decided to visit a neighboring town where there was a large market famous for the presence of the most outlandish things, and he went there early in the morning. The vendor behind the stall promised only the highest quality goods, but Charles had no intention of counterfeiting, having the power of the heavenly path. A set of unusual flowers with roots attracted the attention of the main character. The magic book in my head suggested that this was a rare, expensive item that could come in handy if used correctly. The price was moderate, but the young man completely forgot about money. He had only a few coins with him. The seller categorically refused to lower the price, and the teacher compromised by offering a deal. Charles revealed the merchant's secret illness and promised to instantly cure him of his illness. The young man agreed and fulfilled all the teacher's conditions. In gratitude for his miraculous healing, the merchant gave the goods away for free. At this time, the famous clairvoyant Ho was walking around the bazaar, calling himself an appraiser of things, who supposedly could see the value of goods, offering to buy it from this or that seller and helping the buyer only out of his kindness. People begged the miracle worker to help them acquire unique items. Charles, passing by, saw that Ho refused money and gifts. He chose 5 lucky people, showed which goods were priceless, and offered to buy them for a significant sum, supposedly much less than its true value. The heavenly volume fell into the hands of the librarian, and it became clear that the clairvoyant was an ordinary swindler who had conspired with the sellers and helped them sell their goods for a lot of money, then dividing the profits. The young teacher did not want to interfere, but the prophet himself chose him as a happy victim. It was useless to refuse. The crowd around was envious and did not understand why he was not happy. The main character was offered the product for an exorbitant price. Despite the public's indignation, he refused, knowing the true cost of the item. The imaginary clairvoyant's persistence angered the young man, and he told people the truth, showing the true price of goods using the example of his latest purchases. Ho was confused and hurried to leave, but the deceived witnesses and customers demanded payment and a refund. The main character walked further down the street. He was looking for a bookstore, hoping for luck. Suddenly, there would be literature on increasing energy levels and moving to the 6th rank. The beauty behind the counter was surprised by the topic. She liked the young man for his culture, intelligence, and inner strength, which she felt when the stranger entered the store. The girl agreed to help, advising him to contact the emperor's teacher himself, who lived in this town and owned a large personal library, and walked the guy to his house, warning him that the master liked to arrange tests and exams. The wise mentor of a high-ranking official lived in a modest building. refusing a place in the palace. The interlocutors had not yet reached the gates when they were overtaken by a young rider on a beautiful white horse. It was Lucas, the youngest son of the head of state. Having dismounted, the handsome man was indignant that his friend Dorothy had brought a stranger to visit the teacher. Opening the door, the servant of the owner of the house recognized the guests and invited them in. The young people entered the spacious waiting room. The great mentor who appeared was glad to see his young acquaintances. A stranger looking at a hand-painted painting attracted the attention of the master, and he offered to analyze the work of art. The main character, with the help of the magic of the heavenly library, saw all the pitfalls of the masterpiece. He cut the outer shell of the canvas, revealing the true appearance of the drawing. Behind the outer shell was a completely different picture. The satisfied teacher continued the examination and showed the next masterpiece depicting a huge predator. Charles pointed out the mistakes in the drawing, which surprised the owner and frightened Dorothy, who regretted bringing the brave young man. The master suggested that the girl introduce the guest, completely embarrassing her, since the young people had not even had time to get acquainted. The emperor's heir was glad that his friend did not even say the young man's name, which meant that they really did not know each other. Charles introduced himself, and the owner of the house with dignity called him Young Master, setting him as an example to the young men present. The mentor asked the young teacher to conduct classes more often with new acquaintances, improving their knowledge of painting. Charles asked the master to show him the library, which was the purpose of his visit to the respected man. The collection of books was indeed large, but there were practically no brochures on the topic of self-improvement and achieving the high 6th rank. The librarian leafed through volume after volume, studying new material. The heavenly path concentrated the information it received into one book. It turned out that all internal chi energy depends on the strength of the body and the level of development of thinking. Only by jointly developing all these aspects can one achieve high results. A new impulse of energy captured the main character. He realized that a restructuring had taken place, and thanks to new knowledge, he moved to the next level. The master himself noticed the changes in the guest and inquired about the young man's well-being, lightly touching his shoulder. Charles just turned around, and the owner of the house flew into the corner of the room. The wise mentor realized that the young man had gone through the process of promotion and had not yet adapted to his condition and new strength. In order to determine the protagonist's energy level, the master suggested testing his strength on the examination column and conducting training with Lucas, who holds the 5th rank. The librarian agreed to participate in the fight, but decided to use his new power at half capacity. Even a small effort was enough for the young man to knock out the prince. Lucas refused to continue training due to concerns about his health. Charles didn't realize what level he was on because he had really changed so much. A prepared force column awaited the subject. The young teacher was ready and hit the screen. The result he got exceeded all expectations, exceeding the previous one tenfold. The master was glad to meet the outstanding young man and invited him to visit occasionally, having learned that he was from far away. The young man thanked his mentor and said goodbye. Walking down the street, the protagonist thought about his level, guessing that he was between the 5th and 6th ranks. The teacher's thoughts were interrupted by a crowd of men following the young man. The young master recognized the swindler Ho, who was accompanied by several fighters. These were the same sellers who failed to get money by deception. Now the gang was thirsty for revenge. The first to come out to sort things out was the thug, who promised to deal with the whistleblower very quickly. A few seconds later, Charles hit the giant's vital point, leaving him no chance of victory. Ho sent his best assistant, who possessed a unique falcon flight technique, to fight. The protagonist was ready for the next attack and easily repelled the blow. As a result of a short battle, only the leader remained out of 5 enemies. Charles's advantage was undeniable. Ho did not escape the fate of his assistants and received his share of punishment. The swindler begged the young man not to kill him, promising a reward for his life. The liar gave the young teacher an emerald ring. The library revealed to its owner the secret of the decoration, given to him by a supposed clairvoyant. The item was a portal to a vault of treasures that Ho had obtained through deception and lies. Charles wanted to finally wean the swindler off his lies, and with a blow to the inner point, he protected people from the destructive abilities of his opponent, at the same time taking the money hidden under his clothes. Ho realized that he had lost the gift of hypnotic influence on others. While Charles was traveling, improving himself, and making new friends, his old enemy came to his grandfather, the director of the university, asking for help. Michael told the owner about the inadequate behavior of his predator, who did not listen to his grandson's order and did not protect him at the right moment. The young man asked a relative with high status for help in eliminating a competitor and driving him out of the city, He reported that his classmate Jacques was ready to write a complaint that his student was being forcibly kept in the school without giving him a choice. The grandson insisted on conducting an inspection of the unsuccessful teacher and his pupil. The grandfather was forced to agree and fulfill the request of his favorite. In the morning, Charles entered the gates of his native school. The young man was thoughtful and was making a plan for his next activities. Despite the early hour, all 5 students were in the classroom waiting for their teacher. There were sparks in the pupils' eyes. They were glad that their teacher had returned. The first gift went to Monica. The teacher handed the girl a box with a bud and a root, explaining that she needed to prepare a decoction from this flower and take it according to the scheme in order to get rid of the congenital disease. All students received instructions with individual training plans, developed taking into account the skills and characteristics of each. The mentor allowed them to come up with a name for their tactics themselves, which particularly amazed the teenagers. It was the most valuable gift from the teacher. Before starting training, the students thanked the teacher. For a long time, Mary hesitated to meet Charles again and go to his school, not understanding why he himself did not show her signs of attention. The desire to see her former friend was stronger than her pride, and the girl went to visit. At the familiar gate, she met a man and was afraid for the young man. The brave girl asked the stranger who he was and what he was doing near the school. Monica's uncle, who was waiting for his charge at her direction, outside the school grounds, recognized the teacher. Having decided to take revenge for all the insults and wounds, William thought that he could easily deal with the beauty by attacking her. But the young lady turned out to be prepared, and the fight began. A satisfied Michael and his friend also went to the loser's school to report that the administration was calling him and his student for testing. The young men made plans for revenge and rejoiced in victory in advance. William's fight with the girl at the entrance gate made his colleagues stop. The man realized that the fight would not be as easy as expected. Mary knew the techniques and knew how to control her body. Michael rushed into battle to help his classmate. The battle between the men was fierce, with the young fighter taking the brunt. Monica's relative was angry. He was still weakened by previous battles and did not expect help from the girl, who took this as a special prank to attract her attention to the young man. William, having assessed the strength and fearing a simultaneous attack from several sides, retreated, finally knocking Michael out with one blow. Jacques tried to bring his injured friend back to his senses and support him. A disgruntled Charles appeared and asked what the uninvited guests were doing at the gates of his class. The loser's enemies informed him that the university administration had invited him and his student to the detector tower for immediate testing. The young teacher heard that there was a building where various checks were carried out, including monitoring the influence of the teacher on the will of the students, allowing one to find out their true relationship with each other and to exclude the retention of a ward in the school against his will. The test subject was to be Alex, who had previously studied in Jacques' class. In the tower, while waiting for the inspection procedure, 2 elders of the school tried to understand what was happening and why Charles might have behaved inappropriately with the student. Mary went into the building with everyone else. She was very worried about the main character. She liked him. Jacques expressed his complaints to his opponent and asked for a trust level check. The university director announced the condition that the losing teacher would leave the city forever. Charles asked for the punishment to be increased by stripping the loser of his title of teacher and subjecting him to physical punishment in the form of lashes. The enemy agreed with the addition and was glad that all problems with his former loser colleague would be quickly resolved. The tower keeper invited the participants to the platform with a trust ball to conduct an exam. The ball automatically read the state, determined feelings, and the degree of trust between people. The first to come out were teacher Jacques and his former student Alex, whom he himself had given up after losing a bet to Charles. The young show-off was sure that the teenager would be on his side, because he personally invited him and arranged for him to go to school. The examination screen was silent for a long time, then gave the result, which amazed everyone present. The student's level of trust was at a very low level. Charles was calm and ready for the challenge. The ball produced an instant result, recording record-high figures that even the most respected mentors had not achieved. While the losers were indignant, the tower elder assessed the result. The keeper of the trust ball saw the student's sincere look, his confidence and respect for the teacher. The appearance of a guest prevented the trust test from being concluded. The elders were surprised by the appearance of a high-ranking person. Sandra's father entered the tower, looking for his daughter's mentor. The young teacher was no less surprised than his older colleagues. Charles was even more surprised by the behavior of the man who knelt before him and asked to accept his son into the class. The university director was discouraged. The young man had already been studying at his school for several years. Charles's refusal shocked everyone. The elder suggested keeping the student if the transfer did not take place, especially since the young teacher was of a lower rank and less strong. The high-ranking official countered by saying that the young teacher was able to parry his son's sword strike with 2 fingers, indicating a high level of training. Alex was an eyewitness and confirmed what was said. Nobody believed what was happening. The heated argument of those present was interrupted by the visit of the next guest. The prince entered the tower and greeted Master Charles, whom he had been looking for when he stopped in the small town for the day. The emperor's son promised the director, who was outraged by the young teacher's high title, the death penalty if he continued his speech. The elder was frightened. He did not understand where the loser got such connections from. Sandra's father asked the mentor again to take his son into training. Charles was very tired of everything that was happening. He suggested that the results of the detector be announced and the sentence for the loser be confirmed. It turned out that this exam cannot revoke a teacher's license. A special document that has the right to do so is needed. The servant interrupted the summing up for the 3rd time and announced the arrival of the next guest. A smiling Dorothy walked through the door, having decided to stop by to see a new acquaintance on the way, and who, in addition to working in a bookstore, turned out to be an assistant to the chief secretary, having arrived in town on business matters. The girl greeted the young master and the others present. It turned out that the position of the young lady allowed her to prepare a document revoking the license. Everything worked out well for Charles, who told the new guests about what was happening in the tower. Jacques was devastated. He understood that without the status of a teacher, he was of no use to anyone. Mary could not understand how such a respected person and competent teacher failed the final exam, received a negative grade, a low level, and a negative review. The prince and his young friend confirmed that the rank of the young master exceeded the level of everyone present. The keeper of the tower suggested that the exam result was deliberately changed, and that the headmaster was involved in this fact, changing the outcome in favor of his grandson, thereby forcing Charles to suffer and listen to the bullying of others. The elder tried to deny the facts and explain what happened, but no one believed him. Only Charles' former student, who was declared insane and ran away from his teacher, could save him from shame. A servant was sent for Liam, who was now studying at the school of the famous teacher Mason. The student arrived promptly and was ready to answer all questions. The director began to ask the guy about his previous mentor and everything that happened. Charles confirmed the young man's words about his teaching methods, which led to Liam losing his mind. The student reported that only a new teacher was able to restore his mental abilities and gave him the opportunity to continue studying. The main character asked to show his skills. The young man demonstrated to those present his strength and ability to control energy. Charles pointed out the shortcomings that no one else had noticed, explaining that the student suffered from a rare form of the disease and could not perform the exercises to their full extent without pain and extra effort. His own developed teaching method brought the young man out of control and helped him cope with his problems, but he was unable to complete his studies because he was afraid of his condition and transferred to another school. The elder did not believe what was said. He had come across similar recommendations in the ancient tome, but he had never seen it. Charles offered Liam to participate in another experiment, which would result in the young fighter rising to the 2nd rank. After thinking for a while, the young man agreed. And silver needles with the mentor's energy pierced the body, and the existing silent points that prevented the path to development were eliminated. The rebirth took place. Liam didn't know how to thank his former mentor and regretted not listening to him earlier. Everything he saw allowed the tower keeper to make a final verdict and declare Jacques a slanderer, removing him from teaching. The director also lost not only a student, but also his status, fulfilling the requests of his grandson. The elder, on behalf of the administration, congratulated Charles and apologized for all the troubles caused. The satisfied young teacher returned to school. The master was caught up by friends and asked to teach questions of painting and calligraphy. Charles did not know how to explain to them the vision of shortcomings without the heavenly path. At this time, Mason School was hosting a special guest. The owner of the city restaurant, Thomas, visited his old friend for a reason. He had a plan for revenge on one young mentor, and he needed help. Friends discussed Charles, each with his own reason for not liking him. Clarification of questions and details of the deal was interrupted by a visit from a primary school student. Daniel was average in strength and knowledge. The young man asked to be released from school. Liam appeared next, having come from the Trust Tower, where he had been summoned by an administration representative. The student's request surprised the mentor. He also wanted to become a student at the young teacher's school. That is, to return to his old teacher. Having no right to hold on to his pupils, Mason was forced to agree. When the former students left, the teacher invited his best student, Noah. The experienced teacher was very angry. He decided to organize an exam to evaluate teaching activities, the winner of which would get all the students of the losing side, and sent his protege to convey the invitation to the test. It was daytime. The teacher and his ward had not yet returned from the tower. Charles's students were worried about their teacher. Suddenly, the door to the classroom flew into pieces, and an unknown red-haired young man appeared. The guy introduced himself as a student at the best Mason school. Noah asked to pass the invitation to the exam to the loser teacher and advised him to refuse the test, since their teacher had no chance of winning. The indignant students tried to defend the honor of their beloved teacher in battle, but the red-haired man scattered all the inexperienced fighters one by one. Charles and Alex were returning from the tests and managed to catch the enemy. Noah boasted to the young teacher about his successes, who announced his acceptance of the invitation and offered a bet with a large prize for the winner. The protagonist gathered his charges and convinced them to take part in the battle, guaranteeing them an easy victory. The teacher showed 3 basic simple techniques. The students did not believe that this was possible, but agreed to fight. The result was the complete defeat of the enemy. Each of the 5 students easily dealt with Noah, who did not understand how this could happen, because he had just dealt with them and now owed a large sum to each and to restore the broken door. The pupil, covered in bruises and wounds, came to Mason, who did not expect to see such humiliation of his beloved ward. The wise teacher listened to the detailed story of what had happened. He guessed that the reason for the quick victory was not simple techniques, but vital points that the opponents had influenced. He understood that Charles was not so simple and that he needed to prepare for the exam thoroughly. Mason's friend, a teacher from a nearby school, Olivia, visited him to share the news, telling him that the principal had been fired and was under investigation, and that the unsuccessful mentor had emerged victorious in the Trust Tower exam. The head teacher's class was excited. The teacher was determined to win the upcoming exam and asked for help from the students, who of course supported their hero. After class, Alex shared with his friends the events in the administrative building, telling many interesting facts about their mentor, worthy of respect, and his friends, making them once again convinced that they had chosen the right teacher. Charles thought over a plan to win. He was confident in everyone except the fat man, and found a clue in the heavenly library, learning that he needed to activate the dragon blood that was given to the young man at birth. Of the 3 activation methods, only one was fast and safe, and the main character went to the city of Pharmacists, not yet knowing whether he would be able to obtain the necessary knowledge and the title of Pharmacist, how the process itself would happen and what John would become, and whether his small team would be able to defeat the famous teacher at the exam and protect their students. The young teacher had no money, and he went to the Pharmacists Guild to look for special literature to help his charges. The assistant pharmacist said that access to book volumes was closed to a simple mentor. Only pharmacists could use special scientific volumes, and Charles had no choice but to study a new profile. Sweet Gloria, who dreams of getting the title of a pharmacist's apprentice and is temporarily working in her uncle's house of knowledge, explained to the stranger that it is necessary to study a huge amount of literature on chemistry, herbs, and technology in order to pass the exam in her specialty. The young teacher was ready to immediately acquire new knowledge, which excited the girl, who had been studying these subjects for several years. Charles was persistent and persuaded the beauty to take him to the owner of the local library. Gloria's uncle was more welcoming and provided his literature to the young man. The owner of the training materials said that the exam for a pharmacist apprentice includes practical and theoretical questions. The main character enthusiastically began studying new topics that he had not even known about before, and time flew by. Finally, all the volumes were read. A certain scheme was forming in his head, and the young man was ready for the tests. The young man said goodbye to his new acquaintances, who were surprised by the guest's behavior, who enthusiastically and quickly leafed through one book after another. Charles arrived for the exam. 3 candidates for the title of apprentice pharmacist were already sitting at the tables, all waiting for the teachers. At the appointed time, the chief pharmacist appeared with his assistant, who distributed tasks. It was necessary to answer theoretical questions and describe the plant provided in the practical part. There were many questions. The young man set about solving them. He had to solve 100% of the tasks. The library of the heavenly path did not fail. All the new knowledge just put into it was united into one volume. Charles began the exam with great enthusiasm, and his pen could not keep up with his master. Chief Pharmacist William was surprised by the quick response of the unknown young man, who was the first to submit all the written assignments. The high level of preparation and the correctness of the solutions puzzled the examiner. The questions were difficult, and he did not believe that this was possible. The subjects anxiously awaited the results of the test. For those who passed the first stage, the practical part awaited. 3 people passed the theoretical questions, including Charles. It was time to test the young men's knowledge of plants. The main character got a very rare specimen of a medicinal flower, but the heavenly path quickly determined its type and characteristics. The task was completed. Charles was greatly surprised when the examiners reported that he had failed the practical and had not passed the test. The young man insisted on reviewing the results and proved his case. The famous pharmacists were amazed and admitted their defeat. The main character was given a special token and the title of apprentice pharmacist. The leading specialists were surprised that the young man took his status calmly and asked for access to specialized literature available only to pharmacists. To gain full access, Charles was willing to pass the next exam, which was an interview with all the top alchemist experts in the state. The chief pharmacist and his colleague were simply shocked. They did not expect such impudence from the young man. It was practically impossible for even experienced specialists to pass this level. The young man convinced his mentors to start preparing for the next exam and went to improve his theoretical knowledge. All the printed materials in the pharmacist's library collection were mastered within a day. The assistant sent by the pharmacists to supervise the young man saw only mountains of books, leafed through at speed in a few minutes. In the evening, tired from new knowledge and impressions, Charles went to the hostel to rest. While the young mentor was mastering a new profession to help his students, one of them, proud Monica, was talking with her uncle, who categorically objected to her teacher. The patron saw the plant in the hands of his ward and was confused when he learned that it was given to the girl by the young teacher he hated. It was a rare specimen of medicinal herb, the cost of which was very high even for noble persons. Monica's uncle knew the properties of this plant, but had never seen this miracle before, and even he did not have the money to buy it. The young lady said that the mentor had identified her problems, which were the incorrect distribution of energy, as a result of which her health and fighting ability were deteriorating day by day, and a decoction of a rare plant was supposed to help restore her strength. Having learned the cost, the girl decided, together with her uncle, to immediately thank her teacher, who went to the city of pharmacists for additional knowledge. The inspired relatives immediately headed to the Pharmacists Guild. Upon arrival, Monica learned from a girl in the small library that her mentor was taking an exam to confirm his status as a pharmacist's apprentice. The princess's uncle was surprised. He understood how much a specialist in the pharmaceutical business must know and be able to do. Gloria told her guests that Charles had prepared quickly and was determined to succeed, which she doubted, as the exam was extremely difficult. 2 young men who came out of the testing hall disproved all doubts and confirmed that their competitor had successfully passed the theory and practice. Monica asked if her teacher would be free soon. Gloria was extremely surprised to learn that the young man was a martial arts teacher and had his own class. The young men who failed the exam said that Charles had agreed to an interview with the country's oldest and most famous alchemist. The beauty was amazed that her mentor, whom no one appreciated, was ready to do anything to help his students. The girls were very excited, realizing that the upcoming test would be extremely difficult. One of the examinees said that the interview itself with celebrities is very tricky, and in case of failure or refusal of Charles, he will have to pay a fabulous amount of money as compensation. Monica calculated in her head how much her medicinal flower cost and how much the exam would cost, and was ready to burst into tears. At this time, Charles, unaware of how close one of his protégés was, who was one of the reasons for his interest in alchemy, had finished studying all the available literature and was getting ready to rest. The excited and nervous chief pharmacists were waiting for the young man at the exit. Charles reassured the pharmacist that the interview would take place, and he was ready for the meeting. Not believing the guy's words, the scientists were shocked by his calmness. Charles said goodbye and went to rest, awaiting the arrival of the eminent examiners. At the entrance to the dormitory, a student rushed to the mentor, who was not expecting anything, with words of gratitude and respect. Charles tried to calm the girl down, explaining that it was his duty. Monica's uncle, who had been standing to the side, joined his ward and warmly thanked the young man for caring for the girl. The young teacher was surprised by the changes in the behavior of the previously disobedient and aggressive student and her patron, who had repeatedly attempted on his life. Charles once again told the girl that his students were very important to him, and he tried to do everything he could for them. The Library of the Heavenly Path continued its work, preparing new information based on the knowledge gained. The next volume, including pharmaceuticals, was ready. Monica's uncle offered to partially compensate for the cost of the medicinal plant given to his ward by offering Charles almost all of his savings. The young mentor refused financial support, remembering that he got the flower thanks to his own knowledge and the help of the Heavenly Library, that is, practically for free. The teacher thanked the girl's relative and promised to continue to take care of her. It was time to return home and wait for the call for an interview. Charles's soul was uneasy because of the large sum of money offered to him for the service. After a short rest, the teacher planned to leave the city. He needed to continue teaching his students. There was little time left before the professional test. Monica's uncle was surprised by the young teacher's behavior. He was grateful to him for the girl and was ready to come to his aid. The beauty told her guardian that Charles was constantly being doubted and attacked by former classmates and colleagues, and had recently successfully passed the tower of tests. Monica's high-status relative promised to support her mentor. At home, the night passed quickly. Charles hardly slept, sorting out the knowledge he had received. Fresh thoughts and ideas were spinning in the teacher's head. The results of the training were not long in coming. New strong bursts of energy filled the young man's body in a stream. In the morning, Charles's longtime student, who had been frightened by his teacher's methods in the past and gone to the famous mentor Mason, realizing his mistake after the Tower of Trials, came to the teacher with two friends with a request to be enrolled in the class. The young teacher understood why his successful colleague was offended and challenged the school to a competition to assess professional skills, offended for his reputation. New students were allowed to attend classes. Charles began the lesson with new knowledge and techniques that he had recently acquired and developed. The newly arrived young fighters were surprised. They had never been given information at such a level. It was a modern, simple, but effective presentation of combat techniques and energy flows. Time flew by while studying. In the morning, Charles received the news and again gathered at the Pharmacist's Guild. Gloria, who met the young man, was glad to see him. She began to like him for his simplicity, strength, confidence, and she was very worried about him. The girl took the main character to the testing hall, wishing him good luck. In the large room, there was a huge stove resembling a strange jug. William greeted the young pharmacist. The chief specialist reported that all the leading alchemists of the state had arrived, and the interview would be conducted on the pills in which they were leading specialists. A crowd of senior scientists entered the hall. The chief pharmacist introduced the young man and announced the conditions of the interview. It was necessary to answer questions from all the healers. Charles was outraged and suggested that the experts themselves would not be able to pass their tests, as it was difficult to please everyone. The famous alchemists were dissatisfied with the young man's performance and were preparing for an easy victory. The time of testing had come. Everyone was confident in themselves and their knowledge. Scientists were surprised by the young man's self-confidence. All the celebrities present were highly excited and ready for an unequal battle of wits. The situation grew tense with every phrase the young man uttered. Charles, on the contrary, calmed down and conducted the conversation with humor and complete confidence. The chief examiner proposed to stop the debate and proceed to the test itself. The first to come out was a well-known manufacturer of rare medicinal pills for many diseases, including hundreds of plants. The alchemist suggested looking at the technique of making one of the types of the drug and determining its composition and properties. The process took a few minutes. The specialist worked masterfully and quickly. Charles was amazed by the speed and did not have time to notice anything. He began to panic, fearing his lightning-fast failure. The pills came out of the fiery furnace. The examiner waited for an answer. The scientists present were delighted with their colleagues' work. A moment of confusion and Charles was ready to answer, the celestial library quickly assessing the shortcomings. The young man approached the scientist and, so that the others would not hear, pronounced the name of the famous pills of another author, a duplicate of which was now prepared before the eyes of those present and passed off as his own, which was a complete disgrace. The first specialist was grateful to Charles for his tact and publicly admitted his defeat. The scientists present did not hear the answer and were amazed by their colleague's decision. The next alchemist changed his questioning tactics. The specialist suggested looking at the technology of making the pills and giving it an assessment. The furnace was hot. The scientist's energy was united with the iron monster. The process was completed. The alchemist waited for the result. For Charles, finding the flaws was the easiest thing to do since that was what the Heavenly Library was all about. The young man focused on the manufacturing process itself, including the temperature regime, which was not taken into account when using different herbal infusions. The leading alchemist didn't even think about the temperature nuances and was shocked. Then the main character paid attention to the unit itself. The furnace was outdated and had defects that affected the technological aspects. The Council of Elder Alchemists listened with bated breath to the previously unknown information. None of them knew about such subtleties. Charles continued his scathing speech by explaining that the composition of the fuel also affects the properties of the pills. All of the above-mentioned shortcomings in the technological process completely changed the properties of the drug and could lead to unpredictable consequences. It was difficult for the famous alchemist to admit that the unknown young man was right. The composition of the resulting pill was also fully criticized by the protagonist. The herbs included in the medicine being prepared were incompatible, and for this reason could cause harm rather than benefit to the patient. This was Charles' next victory. Shocked scientists did not believe what was happening. The oldest specialists made a lot of mistakes. The upset famous pharmacist was the most upset of all. He had dedicated his whole life to pills, but it turned out that he was wrong. The scientists were worried, but it was decided to continue the test. Two pharmacists offered to evaluate the quality of the pills they had prepared, concerned about their poor effectiveness. Everyone tried to solve their personal issue, forgetting about the exam. The analysis of the composition of the drugs was disappointing. Instead of peace of mind, they provoked aggression and attacks of loss of self-control. The volume of the Heavenly Library revealed the flaws of each potion. The scientists were amazed by the discoveries and depressed. The Council of Famous Pharmacists was shocked by the young man's knowledge and objective assessment of their work. One of the most ancient alchemists tried to restore the damaged reputation. Charles answered the questions asked with confidence. The protagonist pointed out the examiner's mistake, the influence of his personal attitude and family problems on his work, which negatively affects the properties of the drugs. The honorary badge of the first-star alchemist pharmacist was a well-deserved reward. The scientists admitted their defeat. Charles was not interested in the high rank. He immediately asked to use the elite professional library, which is what the status of apothecary was for. William took his new friend and colleague to the book depository. The number of volumes impressed even the main character. The young man gathered his strength and began to master the new literature. The ancient manuscripts contained many answers to questions of interest. Charles rushed between the shelves, grabbing more and more books, trying to understand the problems of his students. The young mentor found ways to correct Monica's energy and activate John's ancestral blood, which was worth passing all the exams for. The Library of the Heavenly Path quickly absorbed all the information received, preparing its own unique book. Now Charles knew exactly what his charges needed and went to William. The young man asked the chief pharmacist to buy 3 pills and 2 types of herbs. The specialist's answer shocked the teacher. Delivery times were up to 10 days, and the price was exorbitant even for eminent high-ranking officials. A decision had to be made. There was no time to think. Charles agreed to William's condition and set about making quick money. The idea came quickly and needed to be implemented. Thus, the young mentor Charles became the great Grandmaster Ian, performing miracles of foresight and healing, who came to the neighboring town for a few days. Having studied the situation in advance, the young man found a smart guy, Kevin, who was renting out a decent house to a bankrupt gentleman. Having appreciated the skill of the young realtor, the main character went to look at the premises. The buildings were impressive, spacious, and looked quite expensive. Charles introduced himself as a famous gentleman and ordered that servants be found immediately. The house was completely ready for occupancy. The yard was huge. The initial price was too high, but the young teacher was happy with the location of the building. By revealing Kevin's secrets, we were able to reduce the price by 1/3 to the amount originally set by the former owner. The guy was shocked by the information known to the stranger, so he decided to obey the master in everything. The main character offered the young man to become his personal servant, quickly hire staff for service, allocating the required amount of money for expenses. Kevin realized that the new owner was smart and agreed to his proposal. The servant's next order was to spread the rumor of the arrival of a famous grandmaster traveler in the city. Kevin easily parted with his previous job and began to carry out the instructions of his master. The transformation was not easy for Charles. He was tired. It was time to return to the students, and the main character hurried home. In the schoolyard, a group of students were actively discussing some news. Alex handed the teacher a list of future opponents participating in the upcoming tests. Charles assessed the balance of power. Mason foresaw all the weaknesses of his charges and wisely selected an opponent for each. The forces turned out to be unequal. The teacher was determined to earn money and save the honor of his school by going to the neighboring town again. Grandmaster Yang returned to the house where his personal guards were already standing at the gate. The courtyard was clean. The maids were greeting their new master. Kevin met the owner and reported the situation. Charles asked which celebrities lived nearby. The master's solution was to take a walk with his servant through the streets of the city. Now Charles knew that a very rich businessman, a friend of the emperor's family, lived nearby, and he headed towards his house. Coming closer, The disguised youth saw that the entrance to the chambers was guarded by 2 stone lions made of expensive jade. The main character stopped at a small street cafe nearby to have a cup of tea. The master suggested that his servant break one of the animals. Kevin didn't believe his master's words and begged him not to send him to his death. Reassured by Jan's words, the boy took the hammer and went to carry out his instructions. Passers-by saw the head of the stone monster fly off and roll along the pavement. The culprit was nearby. The enraged residents attacked the destroyer. The crowd grabbed Kevin and began beating him. The cruel punishment was stopped by the owner of the house with the lions. Kevin explained that the order to cut off the head of the precious jade monster was given to him by his master. The meeting between the 2 men took place, and the head of the wealthy family, Marcel, demanded an explanation. Grandmaster Yang told the indignant owner how, while passing by, he discovered that the lions were not made of emerald jade, which brings strength and health, but of blood jade, which absorbs the energy of family members. The stones are difficult to distinguish. A mistake was made in the making of the sculptures, which does not affect the owner of the house with a high level of protection, but kills the rest of the members who are unable to protect themselves from the vampire stone, and someone in the house is at risk of death. Charles stood up and said goodbye, offering to think about the situation and return the compensation if the owner of the house did not agree with the destruction of the lion. Marcel could not believe the stranger's words, but his wife was at home, gradually fading away day by day. The rich man tried to ask questions, but Jan and his servant calmly walked away. The master pretended to be offended by the mistrust and did not respond to the appeal. Marcel called an old friend, the appraiser, to inspect the monsters. The acquaintance was amazed, because many years ago he himself assessed the sculptures and did not recognize the bloody jade. Only now the fragments revealed the essence of the stone. Jan returned home with his servant. The master ordered not to let anyone in, intending to rest. After some time, Mr. Marcel and his friend knocked on the gate. The businessman offered Kevin a health potion and money as compensation and asked him to take him to the owner. The servant desperately fought against temptation. The young man refused to accept the gifts and said that his master was not currently accepting them. No amount of persuasion changed Kevin's mind. Only after closing the gates could the servant rest. He was proud of his steadfastness. The boy ran into the house to report to the gentleman about Marcel's arrival. Charles was not surprised. He had calculated all the options in advance. The Grand Master announced that he was going on vacation and would receive guests in the morning. The next day, the gates swung open and Marcel, who had been waiting all night for an invitation, entered the house. The protagonist greeted the guest and explained the delay by saying that the energy of the stone had a destructive effect through transmission from husband to wife. The power had weakened overnight, and contact could be made again. Marcel thanked his savior and went to get his wife. He urgently needed to bring her to examine the sick woman. Kevin was surprised by the gentleman's tactics. As an incentive, Charles offered the boy to increase his energy, which had been stuck at the 2nd level for a long time. By clearing Kevin's meridians and adding his own power, the protagonist increased his level to 3. The servant couldn't believe his luck. The young man thanked his decision to quit his previous job and go to serve his new master and his boss for the life experience. Marcel's carriage pulled up to the house. Charles did not expect this. The businessman's wife was in extremely serious condition. The young woman looked very exhausted and was unconscious. The young mentor looked at the sick woman. The library was silent. Charles decided to take the patient's hand. Her pulse was barely detectable, but the flow of information flowed like a river. The Book of Life spoke of the closure of all meridians and a great loss of energy. Jan promised Marcel to save his dying wife. The needles with a stream of pure energetic force entered the body and consciousness of the poor woman. Charles did not have time to name the price of the treatment and the number of courses. When the patient woke up and spoke, together with her husband, she left the healer's house on her own feet, leaving behind an upset Charles. Kevin reassured the gentleman by telling him that the wealthy businessman had left a large sum of money earlier, just after entering the house. The rumor about the miraculous Grandmaster quickly spread throughout the city, and the ancient clan, whose leader was losing health, fighting power, and was very upset, did not remain on the sidelines. The son brought news to his father about a powerful healer. The town was filled with rumors. Everyone was waiting for the arrival of several masters invited by the emperor, but no one expected the appearance of a previously unknown loner. The head of the clan, together with the heir, decided to check the information and personally visit the stranger. Kevin led the guests into the reception hall. The gazes of the 2 strong personalities met, and they studied each other carefully. The elder doubted the Grandmaster's authenticity and expressed his opinion as he prepared to leave. Charles's words in the person of Ian made the head of the clan suddenly change his mind and respect the owner of the house. The old man threw himself at the feet of the protagonist, begging for help. But it was too late. The master asked to take the guest, who had previously doubted his abilities outside. Left outside the gate, father and son discussed what had happened. The head of the family insisted on a second meeting. He realized that only this man understood the essence of his problem and would help him cope with it. It was necessary to urgently collect money to appease the gentleman. Charles secretly left the city and went to the Pharmacist's Guild, leaving Kevin to spread rumors about a decent fee for Grandmaster Ian's reception. The first part of the order was waiting for the young teacher. The rest was supposed to arrive from afar in a few days. The young man checked the authenticity of the product with the help of an emerald ring, which he had previously received from a skilled hypnotist deceiver, and thanked the pharmacist. William was glad to meet his young colleague and suggested visiting his old friend, who turned out to be a skilled spearmaster, which greatly interested the mentor. He wanted to master additional skills to help Alan in the upcoming competitions. Charles happily agreed, and the new acquaintances went to visit. The famous teacher was very surprised by the young teacher's attempts to quickly learn an unknown technique, because such a thing takes many years to be dedicated to. The young man asked the master to study his home library on martial arts and the use of sharp weapons. The old friends were peacefully drinking tea in the courtyard while their young friend was reading literature, when a fiery spear of enormous energy flew out of the house. The owner of the house rushed into the building to figure out who was the source of what happened. Charles stood among the bookshelves, somewhat surprised. The circumstances suggested that it was his submission. The young man asked to show him some practical combat techniques, surprising the master even more. The energy of the fire spear flew ahead of Charles with beastly power, and the teacher was able to extinguish the charge with great difficulty and remain unharmed. Now the young student acted as a teacher and told the old master the secrets of wielding a spear. William's friend insisted on paying for the lesson, and Charles unexpectedly received the money. The mentor was pleased with the visit. The new information could be very useful to Alan. Upon returning to school, the young teacher learned from John that 3 of his students had decided to defend the honor of their teacher and would fight with the wards of his colleague Ray, the prize being capsules of quick health. Monica, Alex, and Alan were preparing for battle. Taking advantage of Charles's absence, his competitor put all his students, more than 40 in number, against the trio. The young mentor arrived just in time. Alan had already defeated 6, and his strength was running out. Having suggested replacing all the students with 1 Ray before the decisive battle, Charles gave advice to the young spearman, discreetly patting him on the shoulder and injecting him with a charge of energy and newly acquired knowledge. A single blow was needed to win. Alan completed the task. The enemy was defeated with an instant throw of a weapon with a devastating charge of energy. Ray's students couldn't understand how a first-year student could defeat their formidable mentor. The prize was in the hands of Charles's students, but the teacher explained that the medicines won were of invisible harm and destroyed them. The satisfied students celebrated a small victory. It was time to temporarily leave school and transform into Jan again. The main character was ready to receive the head of the clan and invited him and his son into the house. Charles uncovered the secret of an elder who, many years ago, using ancient techniques to enhance his fighting ability, drank the blood of a white wolf. But something was done incorrectly. The leader gradually turned into a werewolf, losing strength. The Grandmaster was ready to correct old mistakes and help restore lost energy. The fiery needles saved the father of the ancient clan from slow death. The miracle worker's next visitor was a local blacksmith, to whom the head recommended a previously unknown specialist. The city's gunsmith complained to Jan about the loss of the ability to make unique combat items, which now completely lacked energy. The blacksmith showed his latest work. The sword was absolutely lifeless. The protagonist examined the weapon, telling its owner that a change in diet would rid him of the problem. The man could not believe the simplicity of the solution and thanked his spiritual savior for a long time. Charles was very tired of his new role, but the money he earned was very much needed to pay for the order. The main character dreamed of the library of the Heavenly Path. A golden book with empty pages was flying around. The young man realized that in this copy, he would have to fill in the information himself. The next day, the long-awaited event happened. Charles was given access to the closed library collection of the Emperor himself. The time spent in the book storage opened up additional meridians and pathways for the flow of pure energy to the protagonist. At this time, having returned from long trips, the head of state became interested in rumors about the appearance of Grandmaster Yan. Specialists in this field collected information from eyewitnesses in order to understand what was happening and verify the information. The emperor decided to invite the stranger to the palace, but the courtier reported that Yang had left the city and the time of his return was unknown. While rumors of magical healing and fixing the problems of famous citizens were circulating around the settlement, the exhausted protagonist spent the 5th day studying the endless volumes of the head of state's book repository. There was only one shelf left with information on poisons. Having mastered the entire famous library, a tired Charles, trying not to fall asleep after several days, went home. He needed to have time to supervise the students and have a good rest before returning to the performance of the duties of Grandmaster. 2 thieves of valuables were walking around the city, recently returned from other kingdoms, picking up another victim's house. They remembered that a rich merchant had previously lived nearby, from whom they had already committed theft, then distributing jewelry and money to the poor. Approaching the familiar building, the robbers were surprised by the huge line of high-ranking people wanting to get inside. Hiding around the corner, the robbers tried to understand the reason for the people's incomprehensible interest. The emperor himself was among those standing at the gate. 3 famous grandmasters from other cities were also hurrying towards the house. Kevin, who opened the gate, was taken aback. He had never seen so many celebrities. The servant said that the master had gone on a trip for a few days and would receive everyone upon arrival. The appearance of the main character was unexpected. The joyful young man told his master what distinguished guests were waiting for him. Charles greeted his dear guests, who had been waiting for him for a long time. The disguised young mentor invited the head of state and 3 grandmasters into the house. At first, the main character invited his colleagues to express their problems. Each of the great masters spoke about his request and asked for help. One of the desires was to move to a higher level, which could not be achieved for several decades. Charles promised to help everyone, but asked for unquestioning obedience, which greatly surprised the experts. The owner of the house invited servants into the hall with sticks and a large bag. A bag was placed over the master's head. Mr. Yang ordered the fighters to beat the defenseless man standing in front of them. Rage and anger played their role, giving impetus to powerful energy to reach a new level. The main character explained that weakness, uncertainty, and timidity prevented him from realizing his plans, and only a strong emotion could help. The great grandmaster thanked his savior. The elder scientists had never seen such methods and were shocked. The emperor's request was to restore the strength and health of a dying elder of the state, whom no one could help. Charles asked in return for 1,000 books on energy levels. The distinguished visitors left, leaving a ring as payment. The great value of the gift was access to a storehouse of rare materials, plants, and equipment. Kevin informed the gentleman that those who had signed up for the appointment had paid in advance, an amount that was significantly higher than what was required for the pills and herbs ordered for the students. Charles's competitor, the famous teacher Mason, also learned about the all-powerful Grandmaster and decided to visit the miracle worker with his brother and colleague Franklin, hoping to receive the blessing of the Great Master and become his student. Having earned the required amount, Charles went to the city of Pharmacists to collect his order. William introduced the young pharmacist to the chief alchemist of the state, Jackson, who had learned of the results of the interview about the pills and was sent by the center for a control test, simultaneously delivering the long-awaited medicinal goods. The young man did not have time to rest and was very sleepy, asking to postpone the questions to another time. Jackson promised to give the expensive order for free in exchange for correct answers and a personal consultation, which interested the young teacher. In order to correctly solve the problem that the inspector encountered when making a rare pill, the main character needed to study the technology as a whole. Each time the process ended in an explosion, which caused confusion among the manufacturer. The answer turned out to be simple. The great alchemist was hindered by his personal aura. In order to prepare a high-quality pill, it was necessary to change the composition of the herbs. The scientist was amazed and thanked the young man. Pleased with the free purchase of very expensive pills and herbs, Charles went home. The tired teacher's main task was to get to school. The road seemed to last forever, and finally the native gates appeared. It was necessary to conduct analytical sessions with the wards, and only then go to bed to rest. The mentor gave Monica a pill that would transform her energy and told her how to use it. John received a potion that activated his ancient ancestral blood. Sandra received individual methods of training their abilities and further recovery of the body to strengthen her legs and Alex's arms. The students were grateful to their teacher. The spearman did not stand aside either. Alan received a decoction of special herbs to activate internal energy. The young students were amazed by their teacher's act of caring for them and vowed to win the upcoming test. That same day, Monica returned home to use the treasured pill. at which time her uncle received news from his brother, the girl's father, in which he reported his imminent return and order of a rare, extremely expensive medicine for his beloved daughter, controlling her energy. The beauty showed the guardian Charles' gift. The man already knew the price of this pill and was shocked. It was exactly what the head of the family was looking for his child. The girl went to her private quarters to perform the healing ritual that her mentor had told her about. John also did not wait long and decided to use the medicinal drug. Charles warned the young man that he needed to apply the liquid to his skin several times a day and rub the potion in, and the pain throughout his body would be very strong, but he needed to cope with it. Only then would the medicine begin to work. The fat man endured the ordeal steadfastly and applied the decoction several times. Finally, John felt a surge of strength and inner energy. His skin became stronger than steel and resembled dragon scales. The activation was successful. The student decided to immediately test his new skills, and the centuries-old tree collapsed from the boy's blow. Monica also felt a fresh energy filling her body. The mentor woke up in his own room, carefully covered with a blanket. The last thing he remembered was the classroom. The disciples carried the sleeping teacher into the house, preparing clothes and food for him. It was time to work off the talent he had received, and Charles once again transformed into Grandmaster Ian. The line at the healer's gate was huge. Famous teachers arrived at the house of the miracle worker, trying to take advantage of their status and get to the master for free. But the servant was unwavering, not letting in anyone who wanted to without payment. The protagonist warned Kevin that he was planning to leave the city soon and would only accept those who had already signed up and paid money. Suddenly, the emperor appeared in the reception hall. It was necessary to urgently take care of the elder's health. The men secretly left Yan's residence and went to the palace. Using the flying steps technique allowed us to arrive at the location quickly. The chief invited the great master to enter. The dying old man was in the main chambers. He was very weak and practically could not speak. 3 grandmasters were nearby. They used all their knowledge, but there was no result. The elder of the state was dying. To prepare the solution, the main character had to render the old man unconscious, then restore his strength to be able to determine the force of the blow. This could only be done with poison, but throughout the country these specialists were outlawed and no one knew them. The Celestial Library was nearby again and immediately collected the necessary information. Charles immediately mastered the new knowledge and was ready to act. The master was determined. He knew that everything would turn out right. The alchemist began mixing the necessary ingredients. The emperor was frightened by the use of poisonous substances. The elder couldn't resist, although his gaze spoke of displeasure. But the poison was poured into his mouth. After a few seconds, the old man, who had been lying motionless, sat up and began to loudly complain. The drug's duration of action was short, and Yang offered to restore the venerable gentleman's vitality, demanding unquestioning obedience for this. The astonished emperor followed the protagonist's instructions. After some time, magnificent young dancers appeared in the chambers. Music began to play, and the old man was firmly held with ropes. The desire to live aroused a powerful flow of energy, and strength returned to the previously flabby, lifeless body. In front of the surprised emperor and grandmaster stood a slender, healthy man. The elder thanked the protagonist for returning from the other world. Jan had to leave, but the butler informed the head of state about the arrival of his old acquaintances, young teachers from a neighboring city, and the young man asked to stay to find out the reason for their visit to the high-ranking official. Mason and his brother greeted the emperor. The teachers asked to borrow a large sum of money to pay for the reception of the grandmaster, who had arrived in the city for a few days. The protagonist, who was sitting aside, entered the conversation, saying that he had heard information about the celebrity's imminent departure and the lack of an appointment. The young people insisted on receiving the money, thanked him, promised to repay the debt, and left the palace, heading towards the already familiar queue, the impudent stranger pursuing them. The brothers approached the famous gentleman's servant, but he refused to take the money, since the registration for the reception was complete. The strange stranger walked past the indignant teachers and entered the gate. Kevin said that this was his master. The young people were amazed beyond measure. Charles was preoccupied with the new problem, studying a book on poisons. He realized that this component was also present in his body, without understanding how and when the poisoning could have occurred. The substance inside him was probably from a past life and was currently being neutralized by pure energy, but it could start acting at any moment. The 3 grandmasters decided to make good use of their journey and explore all aspects of life in the neighboring towns in search of new students. Rumors led them to Charles' school. They already knew about the upcoming teacher evaluation competition. The great masters looked into the courtyard. 2 guys were discussing their mentor's lecture and sharing their impressions. In the far corner of the courtyard, A fat student was successfully conquering the Rock of Knowledge. Having climbed the fence, the elders saw the beauty training. She was magnificent and agile. The movements were precise and hit the target. The scientists also saw a spearman, whose posture alone spoke of his great abilities and concentration. The young man held his weapon confidently and was one with it. The great grandmasters were amazed by what they saw. Harmony, strength, and positive energy reigned in the schoolyard. Every student was busy and focused. The main character was not destined to go home. On the way, he was met by old friends Dorothy and Lucas, who were looking for him to deliver an invitation to the anniversary of the oldest master of tea ceremonies, Mr. William. Charles had no choice but to agree and go to meet the noble and respected gentleman, in whose courtyard many distinguished guests had already gathered. The grandson of the hero of the day, Stephen, was surprised by the appearance in the house of a stranger about whom he had heard only bad news, whose rating and level spoke of the low status of the young teacher. The emperor's famous teacher entered the guest hall and turned out to be Mason's father. The great master greeted Charles and was glad to see him again. The teacher's brothers approached Stephen. They were related and were among those invited to the anniversary. Mason's displeasure knew no bounds when he saw his competitor. The verbal squabbles between the young mentors were interrupted by the appearance of famous grandmasters. The elders happily greeted the protagonist, who was not officially acquainted with them, and was surprised by the warm words. Charles' colleague greeted the grandmasters. At this celebration, he was to accept the status of a disciple of one of them. The head of the house invited close and dear guests to his ceremony. The head of state's chief mentor joined the friends. Grandmaster William loved to ask questions and decided to give the young people a test. Mason and Charles took part in the erudition competition. The main character was at a tea ceremony for the first time. This topic was unfamiliar to him. For the sake of general equality, the head suggested choosing painting questions so as not to embarrass the new guest. William brought a painting that was given to him by one of his best students. It was necessary to determine the style, graphic features, and the artist's intent. Charles was surprised to recognize his work, which he first drew at the insistence of the emperor's teacher and his longtime friend, the doctor, to test young people in the persons of Dorothy and Lucas. The Celestial Library gave him a theory, but it was the first time the young man had ever held a brush. The painting was so magnificent that 3 more copies had to be painted, which were immediately bought by those present. Mason was the first to take the floor and discussed all the issues of painting and graphics, starting with the style and ending with the time frame for painting a masterpiece. The great master was pleased with his young relative. The main character understood for whom his friend Dorothy bought the painting. Charles didn't try to be disingenuous and immediately revealed the secrets of his own work. They refused to believe the young man. It was a true masterpiece by a master of the highest level. To prove his point, the young man raised his hand to the drawing, and the animals and people on the canvas came to life. This was the peak of the spiritual connection between the author and the work. Mason couldn't believe that the creation took minutes, not days, as he had previously assumed. As a prize, the owner of the house offered the main character a divine drink, which he prepared exclusively himself from a high mountain variety. Charles criticized the tea set itself, which was causing the magical properties to be lost, and the technique of making tea. For the first time in his long life, the hero of the day was in shock. All the comments made by the young man turned out to be correct. No one had known such subtleties before. As a sign of recognition, William presented the young guest with a gift in the form of rare varieties of the most elite drink. Mason was completely defeated. He failed to cope with the questions of painting and did not know the subtleties of the tea ceremony at all. The news about the upcoming teacher evaluation had already spread throughout all the nearby cities, and students and teachers were discussing possible contenders for victory. Returning to his native school, Charles found his charges engaged in a strange activity. Alex and John were carrying containers with ink, telling the mentor that in recent days, strangers often spy on training teenagers, including girls. The paint bomb didn't take long to arrive, and 3 drenched men stood outside the school gates. These were grandmasters studying the methods of their new acquaintance. Charles invited the scientists to the school and told them about his wards. Each of the masters was ready to take the young teacher as his student. But for reasons unknown to them, the young man refused the valuable offer. The main character was interested in the world of poisons, but it was almost impossible to find real specialists in this field. This science had been forbidden for many years, and their place of residence was unknown. The Grand Masters invited the young teacher to visit a special library, entry to which was permitted only to true masters. The scientists themselves decided to ask the great Grandmaster Yan to take them on as students, hoping for a breakthrough in new knowledge and ideas. Charles was completing his journey of transformation into a miracle worker, and he needed to finish all his business before disappearing. The arrival of 3 celebrities to the disguised young man, as reported by Kevin, was very timely. The conversation between the high-level specialists was short. The main character said that he was going on a long journey, but he still had his main student Charles, who would be the senior for his colleagues, whom Grandmaster Yang also took as his wards. The elders were grateful and promised to help their new brother. Jan received all the registered visitors and could easily disappear. Kevin informed the master that the 1,000 books promised by the emperor were waiting for him in the courtyard. The time has come for a new heavenly book to appear, collecting the latest information on the highest levels. The transition to a higher level has taken place. The day of evaluation of the knowledge and experience of teachers came, which was awaited not only by the students of Charles and Mason, but almost all the inhabitants of neighboring cities. Nobody expected the competition to become so popular. Gathered in the stands were family members of the students, including Sandra's father, and pharmacists along with William. Even great masters attended this exciting event. 3 famous grandmasters rushed to take the best places. Charles's school stepped confidently into the arena. The young mentor was amazed by the number of guests. Everyone came to cheer for the previously unknown teacher, about whom at least half the country had heard in the last month. Mary and her friend were here too. On the opposite side of the court, a team of a young but already stellar and respected teacher Mason appeared. The spectators assessed the participants in the fight, and the advantages were in favor of the high school. The elders discussed the students' level of readiness and the difference in their levels of physical and spiritual development. Charles' students were reaching the 2nd level, while the opponent was 1 level higher. John was the first to ask to enter the competition field. He had been waiting for this event for a long time and had been preparing for it. A 3rd-year student graduated from Mason School. The opponents exchanged greetings. John was not going to give up, although he knew that everyone considered him the weakest link in the team. The first to attack was a pupil of an elite institution. The fat man only swayed slightly from the powerful push. John assessed the blow as a mosquito bite. He didn't even defend himself. The competitor was in shock. He invested significant energy, expecting the enemy to be defeated, but there was no effect. The young man used all the combat techniques he had learned, but the enemy stood firmly on his feet and only slightly dodged the direct blows. Charles's student easily blocked the tired opponent's hands. The partner couldn't move. It was as if he was in iron shackles. John knocked out his competitor with 1 blow, not giving him a chance. The fat man was irritated by the arrogance of his opponent, who believed in his success and the incompetence of his rival. The young man proved to himself and everyone that it was worth studying in Charles's class. It was Mason's first defeat at the test, with 4 more matches to go. The outraged rivals did not want to admit defeat. The judge ruled against the controversy and declared John the winner. It was the turn of the spearman. Alan was confident of victory. Mason's friends, his brother and Thomas, the owner of a restaurant and Charles's secret enemy, stood on the high platform and celebrated the success in advance, knowing the preparation of the famous mentor-student. 2 best friends since childhood, who became rivals for a time, met in the arena. Mason's protege conceded defeat early and left the battlefield. The star teacher was irritated, but the young man explained that he constantly trains with his partner and knows his abilities. Sandra insisted on being the next number in the fight. The beauty got a strong opponent who knew no mercy. The young man attacked swiftly, instantly knocking down the timid girl with his blow and celebrating his success. The joy of victory was short-lived. The faces of the mentor and friends became blurry. Their cries were indistinct. It was unclear what was happening. Then the competitor saw his rival standing in front of him, and for some unknown reason, he was lying on both shoulder blades. Mason's student attempted to get up and continue the competition. Sandra easily avoided close combat, moving quickly around the arena. Seizing the moment, the girl dealt her opponent a crushing blow with her right leg. Although everyone present knew the story of the child with a severe, incurable injury, Mason's pupil was angry and tried to respond with a counterhook, but missed. The pink-haired beauty was lightning fast at a distance of several meters. This was a previously unknown method of movement that she had mastered in recent days. The young man did not give up and tried to win back. He expected a quick victory, but the fight dragged on. Sandra once again surprised the crowd, including her father, by delivering a powerful kick with her right leg. The enemy could not hold out and was defeated. As he fell, Mason's student made a sneaky move, grabbing the girl and pulling her down with him. The referee was forced to call it a draw. The spectators were outraged. They did not expect such nastiness. It was an unfair outcome of the fight. Sandra was very upset. Her friends tried to calm her down. Charles praised the upset girl. He noticed his own lack of training, paying attention to technique. He did not pay attention to her lack of confidence. This needed to be worked on in the future. It was Alex's turn to show off his martial arts. Mason had studied the problems of each of his competitors' students in advance and knew that the blonde had weak hand strength, so he fielded a hand-to-hand fighter. The fight began with a swift attack from Charles's student. The Iron Fist, as the opponent was called, was ready to defend himself. The fight was intense. The forces were approximately equal. Both students were well prepared. But Alex struck more often and faster, his hands flying from all sides, which was a surprise for the opponent, who knew the weakness of his competitor. The blonde's next attack followed, and a powerful blow with his right hand found its target. The force of the blow was great, and the young man with steel hands was unable to stay on his feet. It was a complete victory for Charles's school. Mason's student refused to continue the fight, worrying about his health. The judge announced the score as 3 wins and 1 draw in favor of the young coach. Charles congratulated the students and thanked them for their support. For his sake, the students were ready to seriously develop and defend the honor of their class. The star teacher was very upset and invited his opponent to a personal duel. But Charles's students challenged the teacher to a fight, and they were ready to defend their respected mentor at the cost of their own lives. No one had seen anything like this before, and the eldest of the grandmasters, Ron, was the most shocked by the teenager's resilience. A golden book from the Heavenly Library appeared before Charles, and it had only 1 page in it. Mason accepted the challenge of the young fighters. He was not going to give up. John was the first to enter the battle, but the star teacher was able to dodge the powerful onslaught at the last moment and stay on his feet. The fat man was pleased and ready for a new offensive. The team of students went on the offensive as a whole. The students attacked the offender from all sides. Alan was preparing his signature ice arrow strike, which his mentor had passed on to him. Mason understood why his spearman refused to fight, as he knew his friend's abilities and was barely able to dodge the formidable weapon. Sandra was irresistible, hovering over her opponent and landing blow after blow. Now the famous teacher understood why his students were unable to win. The competitors' students were significantly superior to them. It's time to show your abilities through an experienced mentor. Charles's students had a hard time dealing with the renowned fighter. Mason used higher-level techniques that the beginners could not handle. Monica entered the fight using her new skills and energy flows. She was very determined. The famous teacher was amazed by the beauty's hidden abilities. Charles's students knew they were weaker than their opponents, but they were not about to give up. Mason parried blow after blow. Suddenly, Fat John captured the enemy in a steel ring. Now it was possible to attack without hindrance, attacking from all sides. The teacher tried to free himself, but he couldn't loosen the grip. This was a tactical move by the students' team. The students continued to demonstrate their abilities. Monica practiced new skills and expertise. The fight stopped unexpectedly. Charles stopped the students who were carried away by the fight. The young mentor ordered John to let go of the enemy. The teacher analyzed the tactical techniques of his students and pointed out the mistakes made that prevented them from achieving the final victory. Charles was unhappy with the team's poor performance. There were many shortcomings. Having finished analyzing the fight, the teacher allowed the students to continue the fight. The students were surprised by the new opportunity to attack. The Emperor's teacher, who was also the father of the star teacher, stood up for Mason and was extremely dissatisfied with the behavior of his adult son. Charles agreed with the decision of the Great Master. He asked the elders to take his competitor as a student, given his great desire and abilities. Grandmaster Ron gave his consent. Mason thanked the teacher. The teacher confessed that before the fight, he gave his students illegal pills and asked renowned scientists to remove toxins from the bodies of his charges to avoid serious health consequences. The Grandmasters were unable to help the teenagers. Charles promised to take care of the problem. The competition judge announced the final result. He had never seen such an interesting assessment in his many years of practice. That same day, Charles's schoolyard was filled with people wanting to attend his classes. The young mentor met with the grandmasters, who offered the young man to choose a mentor in order to later receive the status of a great scientist. The main character was interested in where he could learn about poisons and pass the exam for the corresponding title. Ron handed Charles a tester token for the spiritual level, without which the knowledge test was impossible. The wisest one told where the tests were taking place. To do this, one had to go to a city on the border of a neighboring kingdom. The mini-examiner's screen turned out to be blank, which surprised the young man very much. A golden book appeared before Charles's eyes, and he needed to study it. But the beautiful volume was practically empty, just 1 page, which appeared after the students won the knowledge assessment. The main character decided to go on a journey. The students were very happy and asked the teacher to take them with him. They really wanted to visit other places. It was time to finish the transformations. Mr. Yang said goodbye to the servant, paying Kevin for the work and advising him to take up further training. Charles was returning home late in the evening. He could not accept everyone who wanted to come to school, so he promised to give a group lecture for a large audience. It was necessary to prepare materials. The topic of the lesson was interesting and included information on the basics of training and combat techniques, without which growth and development of skills was impossible. After the lecture, which was attended by all who wanted to attend, the Grandmasters met the young teacher and thanked him for the simplicity of the report and the accessibility of the interesting material. The main character said that he was going to the City of Scientists and asked Ron to accompany his students there. Having completed all his business, the main character set off on a long journey. It was difficult to get into the place where the special specialists lived. It was carefully hidden. But Mary volunteered to accompany her old friend and introduce him to the one who knew the way to the Cave of Poisons. The road was long, so the young people decided to use special flying animals and headed to the city of Tamers. For this, they had to climb the mountains. On a mountain forest path, the couple was met by a young man who introduced himself as the prince of a neighboring kingdom, Jacques, who was studying the animal world and preparing for an exam in taming. A young man with security was heading there and suggested that everyone go together. In order to continue on his way, the eminent person had to complete the task of taming a wild beast, for which he had now set a trap. The Celestial Library told the protagonist the disadvantages of an ambush. Jacques did not want to listen to the advice of his new fellow traveler, who was completely unfamiliar with the life of animals. A golden beauty, a saber-toothed puma, appeared from the thicket of the forest. The archers prepared to direct the predator into the trap. The beast did not expect the attack and began to get angry. The prince activated the animal path control levels. The beast fell right into an invisible cage. But the defense didn't work and the predator was ready to settle accounts with the people. The guards rushed to help their master, but the puma's strength was enormous. The shaggy monster approached Charles with his companion, and the young man tried to calm him down. Realizing that words had no effect, the protagonist resorted to brute force. A few seconds later, the huge animal lay unconscious at the feet of the young teacher. The puma submitted to its new owner, and all that was left for Charles to do was to pet the red-haired beauty and give her a drop of his blood. The teacher explained to the unsuccessful tamer why the trap did not work and how he managed to tame the beast. The tired hero decided to continue his journey with a new assistant. Charles and Mary invited Jacques to join them to get to the city faster. The road was not short. The puma was tired from the heavy load. It was necessary to arrange stops for rest. While the animal was gaining strength, the fellow travelers started talking. The prince was upset. He had not managed to tame anyone, which meant he had failed the exam. The main character suggested finding a replacement, and Jacques remembered a small, nimble bird that had been following them for several days and always did nasty things right on him. No one had managed to catch it. The feathered one didn't keep us waiting long. There was no time to think, and Charles grabbed the nimble bird. The bird turned out to be an ancient species of a virtually extinct genus. Jacques was surprised by the abilities of his new acquaintance. The small bird categorically refused to obey anyone, which angered Charles, and he offered the bird two options. It had to choose to obey the prince or become dinner for the puma. The deal was made. Jacques acquired a tamed living creature, and everyone set off on their journey. The city of Tamers was located high in the mountains and consisted of several levels. People lived in ordinary houses, and animals and birds were given special places. Flying animals were kept under special control and had a price, and exams were held in the animal hall. Along the way, Jacques met his competitor, a prince from a neighboring kingdom who also arrived for the test. On the stone parade ground, another person wishing to become a tamer was waiting for his new acquaintances. A representative of another kingdom descended into the hall on a large eagle. The girl was so charming that the boys stopped their verbal debates and clarification of her abilities and shortcomings. The huge bird behaved very quietly and obeyed its mistress unquestioningly. The future tamers stood waiting for the examiners. Charles and his friend watched the events from the side. Finally, one of the mentors entered the hall and explained that the level of the tamed animal must be equal to or higher than that of the tamer, and the level of trust must correspond to the required indicators. The prince who tamed the wolf received high praise and level. The next heir to the throne could also boast of his result. The princess received a higher score for taming a huge, high-ranking bird. It was Jacques' turn, his little bird rapidly circling in the air. The examiner could not believe that this small specimen was worthy of evaluation and shamefully threw out its owner. The master was angry and did not want to listen to excuses. Charles stood up for his fellow traveler, accusing his mentor of ignorance for failing to recognize the category and level of the bird. At this time, the chief tamer entered the hall with his assistants. The senior specialist tried to sort out the dispute. The main character indignantly proved that Jacques was right. Charles spoke about the little beauty, specifying that it was a rare specimen of a very ancient lineage, and accused the examiner of lacking professionalism and desire to understand the situation. The inspecting handler tried to justify himself and apologize. The second stage of the exam was coming up, and the main character wished success to his new acquaintance. The princess, a girl named Emily, was amazed by Charles's knowledge in taming of a wild puma. The obedience and trust level test was successful. The chief examiner was surprised by the high score. Jacques told how his companion was able to cope with a large predator and a cute bird. The master of the hall told the main character that he would be able to pass the exam to become a beast tamer himself. Emily tried to ask Mary about Charles's sudden success, to find out if he had been involved in taming before, but the teacher's friend said that there was no such profession in their town. The protagonist agreed to take the exam, but asked to use the local library on animal taming. The library turned out to be huge, and Charles was at a loss. There was little time. It was necessary to find a quick way to study the numerous literature. The method was found, and the Celestial Library instantly produced the result. Charles was ready for the tests, and to speed up the process he asked for the exam to be conducted in the form of an interview. Having answered the questions quickly and correctly, the main character proceeded to the second stage. It was necessary to tame an animal of a higher rank. In order not to waste time searching, the young man offered to tame the golden eagle that belonged to Emily, promising him a promotion. The bird turned out to be very smart, and the end result of the unexpected meeting with Jacques was that the young teacher received the title of Tamer of the first star. The handsome eagle received a promotion and became subordinate to Charles, upsetting Emily. Now it was necessary to obtain permission to use the flying animal and move on further on our journey. The only free animal was a tiger-headed predator with huge wings, but its health condition was alarming. Veterinarians could not make a diagnosis, and the animal was on the verge of death. The shaggy monster didn't let anyone near him. Charles took over the duties of a doctor and concluded that it was necessary to urgently make a pill from special herbs. The only first-level alchemist was the already familiar Emily, but she still didn't know how to make drugs. There was no choice. The girl had to agree. The main character convinced her that he would explain the technology step by step. She just had to strictly follow his orders. The oven was ready to go, and the process began. The princess deftly worked her hands, listening to instructions, periodically doubting the competence of her mentor. The equipment was getting hotter and hotter and was ready to explode. The result of doubts and untimely introduction of the plant was an explosion. Charles stood between Emily and the stove. The girl was not hurt. Tamers and friends rushed to find out what had happened and what kind of help was needed. The princess thanked her savior. She was excited and upset, worried that the result did not work out. But the main character was holding in his hands a precious pill, which he managed to snatch from the oven at the last moment. The winged beauty was healthy again. Emily tried to ask her new acquaintance about alchemy, but the young man suggested postponing the conversation. It was time to get ready for the journey. The princess offered to show the way to the city of poison masters, and the teacher happily agreed. As a token of gratitude, the chief trainer allowed the use of the tiger-headed beast. It was time for Mary to go home, and Charles and Emily hurried to the mysterious city. The flight was short. The village among the mountain cliffs seemed small and cozy. Unpleasant news awaited the guests upon arrival. The poison master, the only person with access to the cave, was seriously ill, and the princess suggested that her new acquaintance take care of his treatment. Charles had to agree. It was his last hope, but he decided to change his appearance. Emily was surprised by the boy's transformation. The young men entered Master Sullivan's yard. The girl convinced the manager that she had brought a doctor to examine the patient, and they were allowed into the house. The patient's appearance was terrible. The old man practically did not speak and moved around in a wheelchair with outside help. The protagonist quickly determined the cause of the poison master's grave condition. The toxicology specialists had an agreement. In the event of failure to fulfill the terms of which or the death of the senior, the subordinate would slowly die from a deadly worm that destroys the person from the inside. Sullivan confirmed the young man's words. His mentor died unexpectedly, which activated a terrible mechanism. Charles began to heal, trying to drive out the tormentor with streams of his energy. Only after numerous acupunctures of the entire body was it possible to cope with the difficult task. The worm was very aggressive and did not want to leave the victim's body. The life of the poison master was saved. He began to thank the unknown healer. But the elder was still very weak and asked the young man to help him recover. As a token of gratitude, the manager offered the protagonist a visit to a library with books on poisons. The courses of maintenance therapy were successful, and the patient recovered completely. A grateful Sullivan told Charles about the Cave of Poisons, the keeper of which suddenly died, leaving no successor. Now 3 candidates are fighting for the high post and accepting no one. The main character asked the master to take him to the Hall of Poisons. The study of literature passed quickly. The young teacher was ready to set out. The only way to get there was to introduce himself as an envoy from the central headquarters to appoint a new keeper of the cave. The road was among the mountain peaks. On the route there were numerous huge worms and various insects. Sullivan told the secret of a secret place. It was the birthplace of the magical red lotus. Finally, the entrance appeared, the very sight of which, with a huge evil spider, indicated that the heroes were on the right path. The guests were met by 2 guards. They were surprised that the master had brought a stranger. Charles had to force security to call the hall representatives. The sounds of the struggle brought out the senior toxicologist, who was informed that a messenger from the center had arrived. The black-eyed man did not believe the young man and demanded proof. 3 deputy custodians followed, each of whom dreamed of taking the vacant position of chief specialist. Charles took the initiative and, as a representative of the headquarters, sent the healers to prepare for the tests, based on the results of which an appointment to a position would be made. The protagonist set aside 2 hours for preparation, asking to be accompanied to the library to wait. The black-eyed caretaker showed the young man the way to the treasured book depository. Charles had not expected to gain access to the volumes so easily. While the young man was studying literature, Master Sullivan was interrogated. The elder said that the representative appeared unexpectedly, cured him of a deadly worm, and ordered him to be taken to the Cave of Poisons. Suddenly, a guard ran into the hall and announced the arrival of another envoy from the center. Sullivan was extremely frightened. He understood that the hour of reckoning had come, and he could not escape. A high-ranking representative of the headquarters presented his badge confirming his status. Warren's task when he arrived was to appoint a new chief keeper and collect the lotus seeds, which ripened once a year. An unsuspecting Charles emerged from the library doors, ready to take the exam. Warren suddenly attacked the imposter. The protagonist did not lose his head. He said that he was sent to supervise the appointment and laid out all the information about the envoy. The headquarters representative was surprised by the awareness. He completely obeyed his senior in status. Charles told the messenger about his health problems and gave advice on how to heal and level up. Warren discovered secret information about the cave. The entire city stood on a volcano, and in the Hall of Poisons, a red lotus blossomed and produced seeds once a year using the energy of lava. The main character had already found the name of his own poison and asked a specialist about its properties. The condition turned out to be incurable, and death occurred before the age of 30. The information he received greatly upset the young man. It turned out that he had received the poison in his mother's womb, merging with his blood and soul, which is why treatment was impossible. Charles tried to find a way out and continued his questioning. Warren said there is a legend that only one great man in history was able to cope with the poison and lived for 10,000 years. His name was Sky Joe. The caretaker led the messengers into a secret room in the middle of the cave. In the center of the huge cave, streams of fire splashed. In the very center grew that same magical red lotus. Its crimson flower blossomed once a year and immediately produced seeds with extraordinary properties. This year there was a problem with harvesting the fruit, as a huge dragon settled in the lava and did not allow anyone to approach it or the plant. As the elder, Charles ordered his partner to tame the fire monster under his control. Warren didn't believe he could defeat the monster, but he accepted the challenge. The forces were unequal. The dragon's skin was hardened in fire and was stronger than steel. In addition, the reptile was able to spew balls of flame. Charles studied the monster's actions and understood how to act. He ordered his colleague to put away his weapon and embrace the formidable enemy. A couple of minutes later, the powerful beast was sleeping peacefully at the feet of the surprised headquarters envoy. It turned out that the monster was very lonely, and the use of weapons forced him to defend himself, and affection led to trust in the guests. Warren went to carry out the center's instructions to collect seeds. As a token of gratitude for the assistance provided, the envoy handed over part of the collection to his partner.